My daughter forgot to hang up the phone, and I heard her husband say he has to go to a nursing home tonight. I did not say a word. Instead, I listened as they planned to declare me incompetent and sell my house for $950,000 to pay off his gambling debts. They thought they were dealing with a senile old man who had lost his grip on reality. They did not know I had been a site superintendent for 40 years, and I notice everything. By the time they returned from their fake business trip, smiling and ready to collect their inheritance early, I had already sold the house, packed their bags, and changed the locks. When they put their key in the door and found my note, they started screaming. But before I tell you how I destroyed their plan, let me tell you where it all began. I am Julius Carter, 69 years old, and my hands were covered in grease. I was under the hood of my 1968 Mustang in the garage, adjusting the carburetor with a precision that would have surprised anyone who thought I was losing my mind. The smell of oil and old gasoline was perfume to me. It reminded me of better days when my wife Beatrice was still alive, and this house was a home, not a target. My phone rang on the workbench. It was a jarring sound that cut through the silence of my afternoon. I wiped my hands on a rag and looked at the screen. It was Keisha, my only daughter. I let it ring twice before answering. I had learned to take a breath before speaking to her lately. Her calls were never just to say hello. There was always an angle, a need, a subtle dig at how I was living. "Hello, Keisha," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Hi, Daddy." Her voice came through the speaker, dripping with a sweetness that felt as artificial as the sweetener she put in her coffee. "I was just calling to check on you. Did you eat dinner yet?" It was 3 in the afternoon. I looked at the clock on the wall, the one Beatrice had bought at a flea market 20 years ago. Keisha knew my schedule. She knew I ate dinner at 6 sharp. She was testing me. She was checking if I knew what time it was. "Not yet, baby girl," I said, playing along. "I am just tinkering in the garage." "Oh, Daddy, you know you shouldn't be out there alone with all those heavy tools," she said, her voice dropping into that condescending tone she used on toddlers and me. "It is dangerous. What if you hurt yourself?" I wanted to tell her that I had built skyscrapers in Atlanta. I wanted to tell her that I had managed crews of 200 men and navigated construction sites that would make her office job look like a playground. But I stayed silent. I had learned that defending my competence only made her more aggressive. "I am fine, Keisha," I said, "just keeping busy." "Well, listen, Brent and I are coming over later," she said, rushing the words. "We need to talk to you about something important. Is that okay?" I tightened my grip on the oily rag. It was never just a visit. It was always a presentation, a pitch, a demand. "Sure," I said. "I will be here." "Great. See you soon, Daddy. Love you." She hung up. Or at least, she thought she did. I reached for the phone to disconnect the call, but my hand froze mid-air. The line was still open. The screen timer was still counting seconds. And then I heard it. The voice of my son-in-law, Brent. "Did the old man buy it?" Brent asked. His voice was loud, echoing through the car's Bluetooth system on Keisha's end. "He is clueless," Keisha replied. Her voice was different now. The sweetness was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp edge. "He thinks we are just coming to visit," Good, Brent said. "Because we do not have time for his stubbornness, Keisha. That guy from Vegas called me again this morning. If I do not come up with 50,000 by next week, they are going to start breaking fingers. And that is just the interest." I stood perfectly still in my garage. My heart hammered against my ribs, but my breathing remained slow and controlled. Years of working on high beams taught you not to panic when the wind picked up. "We will get it," Brent, Keisha said, sounding annoyed rather than scared. "I talked to the director at Shady Pines this morning. He said if we can get a doctor to sign off on his cognitive decline, we can get emergency guardianship within 48 hours. Shady Pines. I knew that place. It was a warehouse for the forgotten. A place that smelled of urine and bleach, where the staff was underpaid and the residents were medicated into silence. They wanted to put me there. "He has to go," Keisha Brent snapped. I looked up the Zillow estimate on his house again. $950,000. Maybe $1 million if we knock down that wall in the living room and stage it right. That money solves everything. It pays off the bookie, it covers your credit cards, and it gets us that condo in Buckhead. My grip on the workbench tightened until my knuckles turned the color of ash. My house. The house Beatrice and I had bought with cash in 1980. The house where we raised Keisha. They saw it as a lottery ticket. He is not going to go willingly, Keisha said. You know how he is about that house. He treats it like a museum. That is why we have to sell the narrative, Brent said. He is losing it, Keisha. He forgets things. He is a danger to himself. We are doing this for his own good. Once we have power of attorney, we sell the house, dump him in the home, and tell him it is just temporary while we fix the place up. By the time he realizes he is not coming back, the ink will be dry on the check. I felt a cold rage settle in my gut. It was a familiar feeling, one I hadn't felt since I caught a subcontractor trying to use substandard steel on a load-bearing wall back in '95. I didn't scream then, and I didn't scream now. I reached into the pocket of my coveralls and pulled out my digital voice recorder. I have carried a recorder every day since 1982. In construction, people lie. They say they ordered the materials. They say they inspected the safety rails. I learned early on to record everything. I pressed the red button and held it close to the phone speaker. I hate going over there, Brent was saying. The place smells like old people and grease. And he always looks at me with those judging eyes, like he knows I am smarter than him, but he just won't admit it. You just have to be nice for an hour, Keisha said. Just pretend you care about his car or whatever junk he's working on. Once he signs the papers, you never have to see him again. I recorded every second of it. I recorded them discussing how they would liquidate my savings account. I recorded Keisha complaining that I was taking too long to die. I recorded Brent calling me a stubborn old mule who was sitting on a gold mine he didn't deserve. When the call finally disconnected, I saved the file. I named it Evidence 1. I looked around my garage. My tools were hung in perfect order. The floor was swept clean. The Mustang was a masterpiece of engineering. There was nothing senile about me. But if they wanted a confused old man, I would give them one. I checked my watch. They would be here in 20 minutes. I walked over to the corner of the garage where I kept the used motor oil. I dipped my fingers into the black sludge and smeared it across my forehead and cheek. I messed up my hair, pulling tufts of gray in different directions. I unbuttoned the top of my coveralls so they hung loosely, making me look smaller, frailer. Then I walked into the house. I went to the kitchen and pulled a carton of milk out of the fridge. I left it on the counter uncapped. I opened a few cabinet doors and left them hanging open. I took my medication bottles, vitamins mostly, and scattered them on the dining table as if I couldn't remember which one to take. I sat down in my recliner in the living room. I turned on the television to a channel of static just loud enough to be annoying. I slumped my shoulders. I let my mouth hang open slightly. I closed my eyes and summoned the memory of Beatrice. She would have taken a broom to them. She would have chased them out the front door. But I had to be smarter. I had to be patient. I had to let them think they had won so I could take everything from them. The sound of a car engine cut through the static on the TV. It was a BMW, the engine whining as it accelerated too hard up the driveway. Brent. He drove like he lived fast and reckless. I heard the car doors slam. I heard Keisha's heels clicking on the walkway. I heard Brent's heavy footsteps. They didn't knock. They never knocked anymore. The front door swung open. "Phew, it smells like a nursing home in here already," Brent said, his voice loud and unguarded. "Shh," Keisha hissed. I didn't move. I stared blankly at the static on the TV screen. Daddy, Keisha called out. I turned my head, slowly counting to 3 before my eyes focused on them. "Who is that?" I asked, letting my voice waver. "Is that you, Beatrice?" Keisha sighed, a sound of exaggerated pity for Brent's benefit. "No, Daddy. It is Keisha, your daughter. And Brent, we came to see you." I blinked rapidly, feigning confusion. "Keisha. Right. Keisha. Did you bring the paper?" "What paper, Daddy?" she asked, stepping closer, her eyes scanning the room, taking in the open cabinets, the milk on the counter, the pills on the table. She was cataloging my decline. She was building her case. "The newspaper." I mumbled. "I wanted to check the scores." Brent laughed, a short, cruel bark of a sound. "The game was yesterday, Julius," he said, walking past me without looking me in the eye. He headed straight for the kitchen, probably to check if there was any beer in the fridge. Keisha sat on the edge of the coffee table, careful not to let her expensive dress touch my rug. "Daddy, look at you," she said, reaching out to wipe the grease from my forehead with a tissue she pulled from her purse. "You are a mess. You left the milk out again, and the TV isn't even on a channel. I am just tired." "Baby girl," I said, "just a little tired." I know, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. That is why we are here. We want to help you rest. We want to take care of everything so you don't have to worry anymore. From the kitchen, I heard Brent open a can of soda. Hey, Keisha, he shouted. The old man has top-shelf bourbon in the cabinet. Can I have some? I felt a spike of anger. That was a bottle of Pappy Van Winkle. Beatrice had given it to me for our 30th anniversary. I was saving it for a special occasion. I squeezed the armrest of my chair. Sure, honey, Keisha called back. Daddy doesn't drink it anyway. Brent walked back into the living room holding my bottle. He didn't even use a glass. He took a swig straight from the bottle, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. Good stuff, he said, winking at me. Wasted on you, though, right, Julius? You probably can't even taste it anymore. I stared at him. I memorized his face, the arrogance in his jaw, the greed in his eyes. He was wearing a watch that cost more than my first car, but he couldn't pay his own debts. We have a surprise for you, Daddy, Keisha said, drawing my attention back to her. Since your memory has been getting a little fuzzy lately, and since the house is so big for you to manage alone, Brent and I decided we are going to come stay with you for a while, just to help out. Stay here, I asked, letting my lower lip tremble. Yes, she said, smiling that fake smile. Starting next week, we are going to move into the master bedroom just so we can be close if you need anything in the night. You can take the guest room downstairs. It is smaller, cozier, less walking for you. The guest room was a converted storage closet. It had no windows. They were kicking me out of the bedroom I had shared with my wife for 40 years. They were taking over. That sounds nice. I lied. I felt the weight of the digital recorder in my pocket. It was still running. It will be great, Brent said, taking another swig of my bourbon. We are going to make some changes, Julius. Modernize the place. Get rid of all this old junk. Make it worth something. He kicked the leg of my coffee table. I looked at the table. I had built it myself from reclaimed oak. It was solid. It was real, unlike the man standing in front of me. Okay, I whispered. Okay. Keisha patted my hand. She looked at Brent and nodded. They thought they had won. They thought I was broken, good Keisha said. Now why don't you go wash up Daddy? You smell like oil. I stood up slowly, leaning heavily on the arm of the chair, faking a groan of pain. I shuffled toward the hallway, dragging my feet. I will go wash up, I said. As I turned the corner, I heard them high-five. Too easy, Brent whispered. I walked into the bathroom and locked the door. I turned on the faucet to drown out any sound. I looked at myself in the mirror. The grease on my face looked like war paint. I took a washcloth and scrubbed it off. I scrubbed until my skin was raw. I looked into my own eyes. They were not cloudy. They were sharp. They were burning. You want to play the game? I whispered to my reflection. Let's play. But you are playing checkers and I have been playing chess since before you were born. I reached into my pocket and stopped the recording. Evidence 2. They were moving in next week. That gave me 7 days. 7 days to liquidate 40 years of assets. 7 days to move my hidden wealth. 7 days to set a trap that would snap their financial necks. I dried my face and opened the bathroom door. I shuffled back out into the hallway, hunching my shoulders again. Daddy Keisha called out from the living room. Where do you keep the deed to the house? We just want to look at it for safekeeping. I smiled, a cold, hard smile that they couldn't see. I think it is in the safe, I called back, my voice trembling perfectly, but I forgot the combination. Don't worry, Julius, Brent shouted, his voice full of mockery. We will crack it. We are good at solving problems. You have no idea, I thought. You have absolutely no idea. I walked back into the room, ready to act the part of the fool, knowing that the man who built this house was about to tear their world apart brick by brick. They arrived exactly 1 week later, just as they had threatened. It was a Tuesday morning and the sky was a bruised purple color that promised rain. I was sitting on the porch drinking black coffee from a chipped mug when the moving truck pulled up. It wasn't a professional moving van. It was a rental trailer hitched to the back of Brent's BMW. That told me everything I needed to know. They were broke. They couldn't afford movers. Brent stepped out of the car wearing designer sunglasses and a t-shirt that was too tight across his chest. He looked at my house not like a son-in-law visiting family, but like a general surveying a conquered territory. Keisha got out of the passenger side. She was on her phone, of course. She didn't even look at me. I stood up slowly, making sure my knees cracked audibly. I hunched my shoulders and put on the mask of the confused old man. Hello, I said, keeping my voice thin and wavering. Brent walked up the steps. My gardening shoes were by the door. They were old leather boots, stained with the red clay of Georgia, the same boots I had worn when I laid the foundation for the hospital downtown. Brent didn't step over them. He kicked them. He kicked them hard enough that one tumbled off the porch and into the dirt. "Clean this junk up, Julius," he said without breaking stride. "This place looks like a landfill." I didn't say anything. I just watched my boots land in the mud. Those boots had built this city. Brent had never built anything in his life except a pile of debt. Keisha finally looked up from her phone. "Daddy, we are here," she said, as if she were announcing the arrival of royalty. "We brought our things. We are going to need you to clear out the master bedroom immediately." The master bedroom. The room Beatrice and I had shared for 35 years. The room where she took her last breath holding my hand. I had kept it exactly as she left it. Her perfume bottles were still on the vanity. Her reading glasses were still on the nightstand. "But that is my room," I whispered, clutching my coffee mug with trembling hands. "Beatrice's things are in there." "We know, Daddy," Keisha said, sighing as she brushed past me into the house. "But Brent and I need the space. We have a lot of clothes. Besides, the stairs are getting dangerous for you. We set up a space for you downstairs." Downstairs meant the basement. It was a finished basement, dry and clean because I made sure it was, but it was small. It was a room I used for storage. It had one tiny window near the ceiling that looked out at the ankles of people walking by. "The guest room," I stammered. "Why can't I stay in the guest room?" Brent walked out of the house carrying a box of his sneakers. "Because that is going to be my office, Julius," he said. "I need natural light to trade. You know how the market is." I knew exactly how the market was. I knew he had lost $40,000 last month betting on tech stocks he didn't understand. But I nodded. I lowered my head in submission. "Okay," I said. "Okay." I spent the next 2 hours moving my life into the basement. I carried my clothes in trash bags because they didn't offer me any boxes. I carried my toothbrush. I carried my heart medication. Every time I came upstairs, I saw them changing my house. They put their gaudy, abstract art over the spot where Beatrice's landscape painting had hung. They threw my throw pillows on the floor and replaced them with beige ones that looked like they belonged in a hotel lobby. They were erasing us. By noon, I was sitting on a cot in the basement listening to their footsteps on the floorboards above my head. Thud, thud, thud. It sounded like an invasion. "I am hungry," Brent shouted from upstairs. "Hey, Julius, make us some sandwiches. And cut the crusts off. I hate crusts." I looked up at the ceiling. I imagined the joists and beams I had installed myself. I knew exactly which one squeaked if you stepped on it wrong. Coming, I shouted back, making my voice sound weak and eager to please. I went upstairs and made them sandwiches. I cut off the crusts. I served them on paper plates because Keisha said she didn't want to dirty the good china. I stood there and watched them eat in my living room. They didn't offer me a seat. They didn't offer me a bite. They just ate and talked about how much money they would make when they sold the place. The real violation happened that night. It was 11 o'clock. I was in the basement pretending to sleep, but I was fully dressed in the dark. I heard a crash from upstairs. It came from the study. My study. The room was my sanctuary. It was filled with drafting tables, rolls of blueprints, and framed photos of the crews I had led. It was the history of a black man who had risen to the top of the construction industry in the South during the 70s and 80s. It was my legacy. I walked up the stairs quietly. The door to the study was open. Brent was in there. He had a large black trash bag. He was pulling my blueprints off the shelves and stuffing them into the bag. He was crinkling the vellum paper, destroying drawings of bridges and community centers. "What are you doing?" I asked from the doorway. I didn't have to fake the tremor in my voice this time. It was rage. Brent jumped, then turned around with a smirk. "Cleaning up, Julius," he said. "Look at this garbage. Old paper. Dust collectors. I need this room clear for my gaming setup." "That is my work," I said, stepping into the room. "Those are the plans for the Ebenezer Baptist Church expansion. That is history." "It is trash," Brent said. He grabbed a handful of awards from my desk. "Site Superintendent of the Year 1985. Safety Excellence Award 1990. He tossed them into the bag like they were potato chip wrappers. "Nobody cares about what you built 40 years ago, old man," he said. "The world has moved on. You should too." He turned back to the desk. There was one frame left. It was a silver frame polished to a shine. Inside was a black and white photo of Beatrice and me on our wedding day. We were young. We were beautiful. She was laughing, her head thrown back, and I was looking at her like she was the only woman in the world. Brent picked it up. He looked at it for a second, not with respect, but with boredom. "Tacky," he muttered. Then he opened his hand. The frame hit the hardwood floor. The glass shattered. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet house. "Oops," Brent said. His voice was flat. There was no apology in it. It was deliberate. He wanted to see if I would break. He wanted to see if the old man had any fight left in him. "Slippery fingers," he said, grinning at me. "You can sweep that up, right? Since you are already up." I looked at the shattered glass. I looked at the photo of my wife now lying face down among the shards. I looked at Brent. He was waiting for me to yell. He was waiting for me to attack him so he could call the police and say I was violent, so he could expedite the nursing home paperwork. I swallowed the scream that was clawing at my throat. I forced my hands to relax. I forced my face to go slack. "Oh dear," I whispered. "Oh dear. Broken glass. I better get the broom." Brent laughed. He kicked a piece of glass toward me. "Yeah, Julius, go get the broom." I turned around and walked to the kitchen. I retrieved the broom and dustpan. I went back into the study. I got down on my hands and knees. I swept up the glass. I carefully picked up the photo of Beatrice. It was scratched, but her face was still there. Her smile was still there. I put the photo in my pocket. I dumped the glass in the trash can. "Is that all?" I asked, looking up at him from the floor. "Yeah, get out," Brent said, turning his back to me. I walked out of the room. I walked down the hall. I walked down the stairs to the basement. I closed the door. I locked it. I sat on the cot in the darkness. I pulled the photo out of my pocket. I brushed a speck of dust from Beatrice's cheek. I did not cry. Crying was for people who had hope that things would get better on their own. I didn't have hope. I had a plan. I stood up and walked into the small bathroom attached to the basement. I turned on the light. The fluorescent bulb hummed. I washed my face. I scrubbed away the oil I had applied earlier. I combed my hair. I stood up straight, stretching my spine until I was my full 6 feet 2 inches. I looked in the mirror. The cloudy, confused eyes of Julius, the senile old man, were gone. Staring back at me were the eyes of the man who had fired lazy workers, negotiated million-dollar contracts, and built structures that withstood tornadoes. They wanted a war. They had just declared it. I opened the secret compartment behind the mirror. It was a small space I had framed out when I finished the basement 10 years ago. Inside was a fireproof box. I took the box out and set it on the sink. I dialed the combination. Click, click, click. The lid popped open. Inside were the documents that Brent and Keisha would kill to find, the deed to the house. But not the deed they thought existed. This deed showed the transfer of the property 5 years ago to a limited liability company, Beatrice Legacy LLC. I was the sole manager. I was the only signature that mattered. I took out a yellow legal pad and a pen. I sat down on the closed toilet lid and began to write. Asset liquidation plan. Item 1, the house. Market value $950,000. Quick sale price to a cash buyer. $850,000. Item 2. The vintage Mustang. Value $60,000. Item 3. The hidden savings account in the Cayman Islands that Beatrice and I had started in 1982 with the profits from my first big job. Value $1.2 million. I wrote down the name of my lawyer, Mr. Stone. He was a shark. He ate men like Brent for breakfast. I looked at the photo of Beatrice one last time. "They threw you in the trash, baby," I whispered to her. "They laughed at what we built." I kissed her picture and placed it gently in the fireproof box. "Tomorrow," I whispered. "Tomorrow, the demolition begins." I put the box back in the wall and slid the mirror into place. I turned off the light. I laid down on the cot, but I didn't sleep. I listened to the house settling. I listened to the wind outside, and I smiled in the dark. Upstairs, Brent was probably sleeping in my bed, dreaming of the money he was going to make. He didn't know that the ground beneath him was already crumbling. He didn't know that the foundation was gone. He had messed with the wrong site superintendent, and I was about to bring the whole house down on top of him. The next 3 days were a masterclass in deception. I had managed construction sites with 200 workers and million-dollar budgets, but playing the role of a confused old man was the hardest job I ever had. It required a discipline that burned in my gut like acid. I had to watch them take over my home, and I had to smile while they did it. I started small. On Wednesday morning, I woke up before them. I crept up the stairs from the basement, listening to the silence of the house. I went into the kitchen and turned the knobs on the gas stove. Click, click, click. I left them open. But I wasn't dangerous. I wasn't reckless. Before I even touched the knobs, I had gone down to the crawl space and shut off the main gas valve to the kitchen line. There was no gas flowing. It was just theater. I sat at the kitchen table and waited. When Keisha walked in an hour later, her eyes went wide. She rushed to the stove, grabbing the knobs and twisting them off with a dramatic flair. "Daddy, what are you doing?" she screamed. "You are going to kill us all." I looked up from my empty bowl, blinking slowly. I just wanted some oatmeal, baby girl. The fire wouldn't start. Keisha pulled out her phone immediately. She didn't check to see if I was okay. She didn't check the pilot light. She hit record. "Do it again, Daddy," she said, her voice dropping into that fake, concerned tone. "Tell me what you did with the stove." I looked at the phone lens. I let my mouth hang open a little. "I tried to cook," I mumbled. "But the clicker is broken." Keisha turned the camera on herself, whispering loud enough for the microphone to pick it up. "He left the gas on again. This is the third time this week. He is a danger to himself and others. We have to do something fast." She stopped recording and typed something out, probably sending the video to the lawyer or the doctor or whoever they were trying to convince that I belonged in a padded room. Brent came into the kitchen scratching his stomach. He was wearing my old bathrobe. The sight of it made my fists clench under the table. That robe still smelled like my aftershave. "What is the noise?" he asked, yawning. "Your father tried to blow us up," Keisha said. "I got it on video, though. This is gold for the competency hearing." Brent looked at me and grinned. He didn't look scared. He looked excited. "Good job, Julius," he said, patting me on the head like a toddler. "Keep losing your marbles, old man. You are making this very easy for us." I stared at him. I narrowed my eyes just a fraction. "Who are you?" I asked. "You look like Buster." Buster was a bulldog I had 20 years ago. He was fat, lazy, and drooled on everything. He was not a smart dog, but he was loyal, which made him twice the man Brent was. "I am Brent, your son-in-law," he said, annoyed. "Come here, Buster," I said, whistling low. "Come get a treat, boy." Keisha stifled a laugh. "He thinks you are the dog," she said. "Oh my God, his mind is completely gone." Brent's face turned red. He snatched the coffee mug out of my hand. "I am not the dog, you crazy old bat," he snapped. I recoiled, acting terrified, but inside I was laughing. I had just called him a dog to his face, and his wife had laughed at him. It was a small victory, but I took it. By Friday, they felt confident enough to bring in the sharks. I was sitting at the dining room table eating dry toast when the doorbell rang. Brent answered it. A man walked in who looked like he had been manufactured in a factory that made cheap suits and bad cologne. He was wearing a shiny blue jacket and shoes that were too pointy. He held a laser measuring tool in his hand like it was a weapon. "Greg, my man, come on in," Brent said, shaking his hand vigorously. This was the real estate agent. The vulture. Greg looked around the entryway, wrinkling his nose. "Great location, Brent." "Really great," he said. "But the interior is a gut job." I sat still, chewing my toast. They didn't introduce me. They didn't even acknowledge I was there. To them, I was just another piece of old furniture they had to get rid of. "We are thinking of knocking down this wall," Brent said, gesturing to the wall between the dining room and the kitchen. "Open concept, you know. Make it flow." I stopped chewing. That was a load-bearing wall. I had reinforced it with steel beams myself in 1982. If they knocked that wall down without proper shoring, the second floor would collapse into the kitchen. "You can definitely take that down," Greg said, tapping the wall with a knuckle. "Open this whole space up. Add 50 grand to the asking price, easy." He was an idiot. A dangerous idiot. Greg walked into the dining room. He stopped when he saw me. He looked me up and down with a sneer that made my skin crawl. "Is this the resident?" he asked. "Yeah, that is," Julius Brent said. "Don't mind him. The lights are on, but nobody is home." Greg leaned in close to me. He smelled like mints and desperation. "You know you have got a distinct odor in here, Brent," he said, loud enough for me to hear. "That old people smell. It sits in the carpets. It sits in the curtains. Buyers hate that. We are going to have to rip all the flooring out to get rid of it. It kills the value. My smell." The smell of the wood smoke from the fireplace. The smell of the lemon polish Beatrice used on the banisters. The smell of a life lived well. He called it a value killer. We will strip it to the studs if we have to, Brent promised. Just get us the number we talked about. $950 is doable, Greg said, putting his laser measure on the table right next to my plate. But we need a contract signed today. The market is shifting. We need to list it by Monday. Brent nodded eagerly. I have the paperwork right here, he said. He pulled a folder out of a box on the floor. He laid a contract on the table. We just need to get the signature sorted, Greg said, glancing at me. Can he sign? Brent laughed. He doesn't know what day it is, Greg. But don't worry, I have power of attorney pending. And in the meantime, I have practiced his signature. Brent pulled a pen from his pocket. He leaned over the document. I watched him. He was about to commit a felony right in front of me. He was about to forge my name on a listing agreement for my own house. I needed that document. I needed proof of the forgery. I waited until the pen touched the paper. I waited until he had scratched out the first loop of the J for Julius. Then I struck. I let my hands spasm. I swept my arm across the table in a jerky, uncontrolled motion. My elbow hit my mug of coffee. The mug flew. Hot black coffee splashed across the table. It soaked the tablecloth. It hit Greg's shiny blue suit. It pooled around the contract. Oh, hell, Brent screamed, jumping back. You stupid old man, Greg yelled, brushing frantically at his jacket. This is silk. This is Italian silk. I wailed. A high, thin sound of distress. Buster made a mess, I cried. Buster spilled it. Keisha ran in from the other room. What happened? She shrieked. He threw coffee on us, Brent yelled. Get some towels, Keisha. Save the contract. They were all moving. Keisha was running to the kitchen. Brent was trying to dab coffee off the paper. Greg was cursing and looking for a bathroom. In the chaos, nobody was looking at me. I reached into the pocket of my cardigan. I pulled out my smartphone. It was a new model, fully updated, which I kept hidden. I held it low near the edge of the table. I snapped 3 pictures in rapid succession. Click, click, click. I got the contract. I got the wet stain. And most importantly, I got the signature. It was halfway done, but it was clearly an attempt to copy my name. It was shaky and crude. It looked nothing like my actual signature, which was precise and elegant, but it was proof of intent. I slipped the phone back into my pocket just as Keisha returned with a roll of paper towels. She started wiping the table aggressively, pushing my arm out of the way. Look what you did, Daddy, she hissed. You are making this impossible. I shrank back in my chair, trembling. I want to go downstairs, I whispered. I want to go to my room. Go then, Brent shouted. Just get out of my sight. I stood up. I looked at the contract one last time. It was stained brown, but the ink was still wet. I shuffled toward the basement door. I heard them behind me. Is it ruined? Greg asked. It is fine, Brent said. I will just print another one. I will sign it later when he is asleep. I closed the basement door behind me. I locked it. I walked down the stairs, my back straightening with every step. I sat on my cot and pulled out my phone. I zoomed in on the photo. The forgery was pathetic. Mr. Stone, my lawyer, was going to have a field day with this. I sent the photo to Mr. Stone with a text message. Item 4 for the file. Forged real estate listing agreement. Proceed with the sale to our private buyer. Do not let these amateurs slow us down. I put the phone away. I could hear them upstairs cleaning and cursing. They were talking about ripping up the carpets to get rid of my smell. Let them talk. Let them plan. They were measuring drapes for a house they didn't own. They were forging signatures for a man who was 5 steps ahead of them. I lay back on the cot and closed my eyes. The smell of the basement was earth and concrete. It smelled like strength. Monday was coming, and on Monday the real eviction would begin. Friday night arrived with the smell of cheap cologne and bad decisions. Keisha and Brent were going out to celebrate. They were going to a new club downtown called The Vault because they believed they had already won the lottery. They believed the house was theirs. They believed the old man downstairs was confused and helpless. They believed they were hours away from being millionaires. I watched them from the basement window as they walked to Brent's car. Keisha was wearing a red dress that probably cost more than my first truck. Brent was wearing a suit that shined too much under the streetlights. They looked like success. They looked like money. But I knew better. I knew that the car was leased and the clothes were charged to a card that was already maxed out. Have fun, kids, I whispered to the empty room. Drink up. because the hangover is going to last a lifetime. As soon as the taillights disappeared around the corner, I moved. I didn't shuffle. I didn't groan. I walked up the stairs with the silent purpose of a man inspecting a job site after hours. I went straight to the master bedroom. My bedroom. The door was open. The room was a disaster zone. Clothes were piled on the floor. Empty takeout containers were stacked on my antique dresser. The smell of Beatrice's lavender sachets was gone, buried under the stench of stale pizza and Brent's body spray. I stepped over a pile of designer shoeboxes and walked to the desk. It was the desk where I had balanced the family checkbook for 40 years. Now it was covered in energy drink cans and lottery tickets. And there it was, the laptop. It was open, but the screen was dark. I tapped the spacebar. The screen flared to life, demanding a password. I pulled up a chair and sat down. I cracked my knuckles. I was not a computer genius. I had learned CAD software in the 90s because I had to, but I was not a hacker. However, I knew people, and I knew Brent. Brent was a simple man. He was arrogant, he was obsessed with wealth, and he was lazy. I tried his birthday first. Incorrect. I tried Keisha's birthday. Incorrect. I tried the name of his car. Incorrect. I sat back and looked around the room. What did this man care about? What did he worship? My eyes landed on a small framed poster he had put up on the wall next to the bathroom. It was a picture of a stack of gold bars with the words "Cash is King" written underneath it. I typed in, "Cash is king." Incorrect. I frowned. I tried a variation. "Money is king." The circle spun. The screen unlocked. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. It was pathetic. It was exactly what I expected from him. He didn't secure his digital life because he didn't think anyone was smart enough to break in, especially not his senile father-in-law. I opened his email client. I ignored the hundreds of unread messages from LinkedIn and the spam folders. I went straight to the search bar. I typed in the word "O." The results filled the screen. There were emails from credit card companies, emails from the leasing agency for the BMW, emails from student loan collectors. But the ones that caught my eye were from a sender named Vinny, no last name, just Vinny. The subject lines were not professional. They were short. Where is it? Tuesday. Time is up. I opened the most recent one, dated just 4 hours ago. Listen, Brent, you have been dodging me. I do not like being dodged. You said the old man was signing the papers this week. You said the house was a done deal. I am looking at my ledger, and I see $200,000 missing. That is a lot of money, Brent. That is the kind of money that gets people hurt. You have 30 days. If I do not have my money by the 1st of the month, I am going to send some guys to help you find it. And they are going to start by breaking your thumbs. Do not make me come out there. Vinny. I read it twice. $200,000. It wasn't an investment gone wrong. It wasn't a bad market turn. It was gambling. I clicked on another tab in his browser history. Online poker, sports betting sites, crypto casinos. He was a degenerate gambler. He had bet the farm and lost. I kept digging. I found the credit card statements for Keisha, $50,000 in debt. She was buying purses and shoes to impress friends she didn't even like while her husband was one bad hand away from getting his legs broken. I sat back in the chair and the full weight of the situation settled on my shoulders. They weren't just greedy. They were desperate. This changed everything. Greed is slow. Greed can be negotiated with. Desperation is fast. Desperation is violent. If they didn't sell this house in 30 days, Brent was going to be physically harmed. And a man facing that kind of pain will do anything to avoid it. That explained the rush. That explained the nursing home. They needed me gone. They needed me declared incompetent so they could liquidate the asset immediately. They didn't care if I rotted in Shady Pines. They didn't care if I died. In fact, my death would solve their problems even faster. I looked at the screen. I was looking at the motive for my own murder if it came to that. I needed copies. I needed proof. I found the print command. I sent the emails to the wireless printer that sat on the corner of the desk. The machine whirred to life. It spit out page after page of threats, page after page of financial ruin. I picked up the papers. The ink was warm. I looked at the dates. They had been planning this for months. They had been waiting for the debt to get big enough to justify the risk. And now they were in the end game. I cleared the browser history. I logged out. I wiped the keyboard with my handkerchief to remove any grease or fingerprints. I took the stack of papers and walked out of the room. I went downstairs to the kitchen. I made myself a cup of tea. I sat at the table in the dark house listening to the refrigerator hum. My daughter was married to a man who owed money to a shark named Vinny. And instead of coming to me, instead of asking for help or admitting they were in trouble, they decided to sacrifice me. They decided that my life, my 40 years of hard work, was just collateral damage to cover their mistakes. I took a sip of tea. It was bitter. It tasted like the truth. I reached for my phone. It was 11 o'clock at night, but I knew Mr. Stone would be awake. Lawyers like him didn't sleep. They waited. I dialed the number. He picked up on the second ring. "Julius," he said. His voice was gravel and smoke. "Is it done?" "Not yet," I said. But I found the accelerant. I told him about the emails. I told him about Vinny. I told him about the $250,000 of debt hanging over their heads. Stone let out a low whistle. "They are desperate, Julius," he said. "Desperate people make sloppy mistakes, but they are also dangerous. You need to get out of there." "I am not going anywhere, Stone," I said. "This is my house. I built the deck. I poured the driveway. I am not leaving until they do." "Suit yourself," Stone said. "But we need to move the timeline up. If they have a 30-day deadline, they are going to try something drastic soon." "I know," I said. "That is why we are selling the house." "To who?" Stone asked. "Did you find a buyer on the open market?" "No," I said. "I don't want an open market sale. I don't want them to see a for sale sign in the yard. I want this done quietly. I want it done in the dark. I have a buyer," I continued. "I contacted the Heritage Preservation Society of Atlanta. They have been looking for a property in this district to convert into a museum for African American history and the trades. They want to honor the black builders who built this city." Stone was silent for a moment. "That is poetic, Julius," he said. "They offered $1.2 million cash," I said. "They want to preserve the structure. They want to keep my workshop exactly as it is." "And you accepted?" Stone asked. "I am accepting now," I said. "Draw up the papers, Stone. I want the sale to close in 48 hours. I want the title transferred out of Beatrice Legacy LLC and into their name by Tuesday." "What about the kids?" Stone asked. "They think they are selling it for $950 to a flipper," I said. "Let them think that. Let them think they have a deal. When they find out the truth, it needs to be too late." I heard the sound of a keyboard clacking on the other end of the line. "I will have the courier bring the documents to your coffee shop tomorrow morning," Stone said. "Do not sign anything at the house. Do not let them see you with a pen." "I won't," I said. And Julius Stone added, his voice dropping lower. "Be careful. If this guy Vinny is real, your son-in-law is walking dead. Do not let him take you with him." I hung up the phone. I looked at the stack of emails on the table. Vinny the shark. He sounded scary. But he didn't know who he was dealing with either. Brent was afraid of a man who would break his thumbs. He should have been afraid of the man who was about to break his entire life. I stood up and walked to the basement. I hid the papers in my fireproof box inside the wall. I laid down on my cot. 30 days. They had 30 days to come up with the money or face the consequences. They were going to lose the house. They were going to lose the car. They were going to lose their freedom. And I was going to be the one to open the door and show them the way out. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in a week, I slept soundly. The plan was in motion. The foundation was poured. Now I just had to wait for the cement to dry. Saturday morning arrived with a false brightness that did not match the knot in my stomach. Keisha came down to the basement early while I was still pretending to struggle with the buttons on my shirt. She was dressed in a pastel yellow suit that looked expensive, but I noticed a small stain on the lapel and a loose thread on the hem. It was a perfect metaphor for her life. Shiny on the outside, but falling apart at the seams. "Come on, Daddy," she said, clapping her hands together like she was rallying a toddler. "We are going on a little field trip today. Remember I told you about that resort, the one with the garden and the game room?" I looked at her with my mouth slightly open, blinking slowly. "The resort," I repeated, letting the word roll around on my tongue like a marble. "Is Beatrice there?" Keisha sighed, a sharp sound of impatience she tried to mask with a smile. "No, Daddy, Beatrice is in heaven. But there are lots of nice people there. People your age. You are going to love it." She led me out to the car. Brent was not coming. He was upstairs pacing the floorboards, probably trying to figure out which kneecap Vinny was going to break first if the money didn't come through. I climbed into the passenger seat of her car. It smelled of stale perfume and anxiety. We drove for 30 minutes. I knew exactly where we were going. I knew the city grid better than the back of my hand. I had laid the sewage lines for half these neighborhoods back in the 80s. We were leaving the suburbs. We were leaving the nice part of town. We were heading toward the industrial district where the zoning laws were loose and the buildings were old. "Look at the scenery," Daddy Keisha said, pointing at a row of abandoned warehouses. "Isn't it peaceful out here?" "It looks like the scrapyard," I mumbled. Keisha laughed, a nervous, high-pitched sound. "You are so funny. It is just secluded. That is what you pay for. Privacy." She turned onto a road that was more pothole than pavement. My head bounced against the headrest. We passed a liquor store with bars on the windows and a mechanic shop that looked like it chopped cars for parts. Then we saw it. Shady Pines. The name was a lie. There were no pines. There was one dead oak tree in the front yard, its branches reaching up like skeletal fingers. The building was a single-story brick structure that looked like it had been a motel in a former life. The paint was peeling in long gray strips like dead skin. The grass was brown and patchy. "Here we are," Keisha announced, pulling into the parking lot. "Look, Daddy, it is practically a country club." I gripped my cane. It was a sturdy hickory stick I had carved myself. I held it tight, not for support, but to keep my hands from shaking with rage. This was where she wanted to leave me. This was what she thought I was worth. We got out of the car. The air smelled of boiled cabbage and something sharper, something chemical, like industrial cleaner, trying to cover up the scent of decay. We walked to the front door. It was locked. Keisha had to buzz a button. A voice crackled over the intercom asking who we were. "Keisha Carter," she said. "I have an appointment with Director Gable." The buzzer sounded a harsh, angry noise. We walked in. If the outside was bad, the inside was a nightmare. The linoleum floor was scuffed and yellowed. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered, casting everything in a sickly green pallor. But it was the sound that hit me first. It was a low, constant moaning. It wasn't one person. It was the collective sound of 50 people who had been forgotten. A television in the corner of the lobby was blaring a cartoon at maximum volume, but nobody was watching it. 3 elderly residents were slumped in wheelchairs facing the wall. One of them was drooling onto his shirt. Another was asleep or unconscious, it was hard to tell. "Look, Daddy," Keisha said, her voice tight. "They have a big screen TV. You love TV." I looked at the woman in the wheelchair. She was wearing a hospital gown that was open in the back. Her socks were mismatched. She looked at me with eyes that had gone hollow a long time ago. "I want to go home," I whispered. "I don't like it here." Keisha dug her fingernails into my arm. She leaned close, her breath hot in my ear. "Stop it," she hissed. "You are going to ruin this. Just smile and act nice." A door down the hallway slammed open. A large woman in scrubs marched out. She was yelling at a small, frail man who was trying to walk toward the exit. "Sit your behind down, Mr. Henderson," she shouted. "I am not telling you again. You wet yourself one more time and you are going to bed without supper." She grabbed the man by the arm and shoved him roughly into a chair. He whimpered. I felt a surge of adrenaline. I wanted to take my cane and show that nurse what happens when you put your hands on someone who can't fight back. I wanted to tear this place down brick by brick. But I couldn't. Not yet. Keisha turned her back to the scene, pretending she hadn't seen it. "They have such a dedicated staff," she said to me, her smile now a rictus of desperation. "They really care about discipline. That is good. It keeps everyone safe." A door to the right opened, and a woman walked out. She was wearing a suit that was too tight, and she smelled of cigarette smoke. This was Director Gable. She looked at Keisha, and then she looked at me. She didn't see a person. She saw a monthly check. She saw a bed filled. "Mrs. Carter," she said, extending a hand with long acrylic nails. "And this must be Julius." Keisha shook her hand vigorously. "Yes, this is my father. He is a little confused today. He forgets where he is sometimes." Director Gable nodded, looking me up and down like I was a used car. "We specialize in confused," she said. "We have a very secure unit. Nobody gets out unless we let them out." She led us into her office. It was the only clean room in the building. There were fake flowers on the desk and a picture of a cat on the wall. "Sit down," she ordered, pointing to a chair. I sat. I held my cane between my knees. I looked at the floor. "So," Keisha said, sitting down across from the director, "we are ready to move forward. My husband and I are going out of town on business next week, and we need him settled before we go." Director Gable pulled a thick file folder from her drawer. "Standard procedure," she said. "We need the first month's payment plus a security deposit. $5,000 total. And we need the power of attorney on file." Keisha pulled a checkbook out of her purse. It was my checkbook. She had stolen it from the desk drawer. She wrote the check with a flourish. "Here is the deposit," she said, "and here is the power of attorney." She handed over the papers Brent had printed, the ones with the forged signature. Director Gable glanced at them. She didn't check the signature. She didn't care. As long as the check cleared, she would have accepted a document signed by Mickey Mouse. "Excellent," she said. "Now we just need Julius to sign the admission forms." "It is a formality, really, since you have power of attorney, but we like to have the residence mark on the paper. It makes the state inspectors happy." She pushed a document toward me. It was the voluntary admission form. It stated that I, Julius Carter, was entering Shady Pines of my own free will and that I understood I could not leave without medical discharge. "Sign here," Daddy Keisha said, handing me a pen. "Just right here on the line." I looked at the paper. If I signed my name, this would be legal. It would be harder to undo. But if I didn't sign, they would force me. They would declare me incompetent right here and now. I took the pen. My hand trembled. I let it shake violently. "I can't read it," I mumbled. "The letters are dancing. Just sign your name," Keisha said, her voice edging toward panic. "Just make a mark, Daddy. Do it for me. Do it so we can be happy." Happy. She wanted me to sign my life away so she could be happy spending my money. I lowered the pen to the paper. I felt the eyes of the director and my daughter burning into the top of my head. They were so close to their victory. I put the tip of the pen on the signature line. I didn't write Julius. I didn't write Carter. I let my hand jerk and spasm. I drew a jagged line up, then a jagged line down, then a circle, then a loop. To the casual observer, it looked like the scribbles of a man with Parkinson's. It looked like nonsense. But if you looked closely, if you knew what you were looking for, you could see the letters. N-O-P-E. Nope. I finished with a hard dot at the end that almost tore the paper. "There," I said, dropping the pen. "I did it." Keisha snatched the paper away before the ink was dry. She didn't even look at it. She just saw ink on the line, and that was enough. "Good job, Daddy," she said, breathing out a sigh of relief. "You did such a good job." Director Gable took the paper and filed it away. "Welcome to Shady Pines, Julius," she said. "We will have a bed ready for you on Monday." Monday. The same day the house sale was closing. The same day they thought they were getting rich. We walked out of the office. We walked back through the lobby of moaning souls. We walked out into the gray afternoon light. Keisha was practically skipping. She pulled out her phone and texted Brent. I knew exactly what she was typing. "It is done." I sat in the car and watched the dead oak tree through the window. I touched the pocket where my phone was hidden. I had recorded the entire meeting. I had recorded the nurse abusing the patient. I had recorded the director accepting a check from a stolen checkbook. They thought they were dropping me off at a prison on Monday. They didn't know that on Monday I wasn't going to be the prisoner. I was going to be the warden, and their sentence was just beginning. Sunday morning broke with a heavy gray sky that hung low over the city like a wet wool blanket. Keisha and Brent were still asleep upstairs, probably dreaming of spending money they did not have. I slipped out the back door wearing my church suit, telling myself I was going for a walk to clear my head. I walked 3 blocks to the corner where a black sedan was waiting. The tinted window rolled down and Mr. Stone nodded at me. "Get in, Julius," he said. "We have work to do." We drove to his office, a small brick building in a quiet part of town that smelled of old paper and leather. Stone did not waste time with small talk. He laid a thick file on his mahogany desk. "I reviewed the documents you sent me," Stone said, leaning back in his chair. "The forgery on the listing agreement is laughable. A first-year law student could tear it apart. But it does not matter anyway because Brent made a fatal error in his research." I smiled for the first time in days. I knew exactly what the error was. "He thinks he is selling the house of Julius Carter," I said. "Exactly," Stone replied, tapping the file. "But Julius Carter does not own the house. Beatrice Legacy LLC owns the house, and has owned it for 5 years. I remembered the day I signed those papers. It was shortly after Beatrice passed. I wanted to protect what we had built. I transferred the deed, the savings accounts, and the investment portfolio into the LLC. I appointed myself as the sole manager with full executive power. Brent could forge my personal signature 1,000 times, but he could not forge the corporate seal or the executive authorization required to sell company assets. So the contract he signed with the real estate agent is void, I asked. "It is worse than void," Stone said, a shark-like grin spreading across his face. It is fraud. He is attempting to sell property that does not belong to the individual he claims to represent. When he shows up at the closing table without the corporate resolution, the title company will laugh him out of the room. But we are not going to wait for that, are we? No, I said. We are going to close the real deal first. Stone pulled out a fresh contract. The Heritage Preservation Society is ready, he said. They have reviewed the structural reports. They know about the historical significance of your work in the community. They are offering $1.2 million. Cash, no contingencies. They want to close tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., $1.2 million. It was more than the house was worth on paper, but to them, it was history. To Brent, it was just a pile of bricks to be cashed in. I picked up the pen. My hand did not shake. I signed my name, Julius Carter Manager, Beatrice Legacy, LLC. The signature was bold and sweeping, nothing like the shaky scratch I had given Keisha at the nursing home. Done, I said, putting the pen down. Stone took the papers. I will file the deed transfer electronically tomorrow morning at 9:01, he said. By the time your son-in-law wakes up from his hangover, the house will legally belong to the Preservation Society. I stood up and buttoned my jacket. Thank you, Stone, I said. Be careful going back there, Julius, he warned. When the walls start closing in on them, they are going to panic. I am counting on it, I said. I walked back to the house feeling lighter than I had in years. I slipped back inside just as I heard footsteps upstairs. I went down to the basement and changed into my old cardigan and slippers. I messed up my hair. I put the mask back on. An hour later, I heard the doorbell ring. I went upstairs, shuffling my feet. Brent was at the door, ushering in a man who looked like he was made of spray tan and hair gel. He was wearing a suit that cost more than my car, but fit him poorly. Julius, this is Mr. Sterling. Brent said, his voice booming with false cheer. He is a developer. He is very interested in the property. Mr. Sterling did not offer to shake my hand. He looked past me as if I were a piece of furniture that needed to be moved. So this is it, he said, looking around the living room. Good bones, I guess. But the aesthetic is very dated. Very urban, if you know what I mean. I knew exactly what he meant. He meant black. He meant he didn't like the African art Beatrice had collected. He didn't like the photos of my ancestors on the wall. He didn't like the history. We are going to gut it anyway. Sterling continued walking into the kitchen. Rip all this out. Open floor plan. Quartz countertops. Gray floors. Make it look like everything else on the market. We need to erase the character to get the premium price. I stood in the doorway gripping my cane. He wanted to erase us. He wanted to turn my home into a sterile gray box for yuppies who wouldn't know a joist from a jam. Brent nodded eagerly like a bobblehead doll. Absolutely, Mr. Sterling, he said. Rip it all out. We just want to sell. We are motivated sellers. Sterling tapped the wall I had built with my own hands. I will give you $950,000, he said. Cash. Quick close. But I want the place empty in 48 hours. No junk left behind. He gestured vaguely at me when he said junk. Brent looked like he had just won the Super Bowl. Deal, he shouted. 950 is the number. We can have it empty. Don't worry about the old man. He is moving to a facility on Monday. I watched them shake hands. They were celebrating a deal that didn't exist for a house neither of them owned. I reached into my pocket and felt my phone. I pulled it out, keeping it hidden below the counter height. I typed a text message to the contact saved as Buyer X. Price locked at $1.2 million. Cash. Sign now. I hit send. A moment later, my phone buzzed. Confirmed. See you at closing. I smiled. It was a small, confused smile on the outside, but inside I was grinning like a wolf. Sterling left 10 minutes later, promising to have his lawyer send the paperwork over by the afternoon. Brent closed the door and let out a whoop of joy. He grabbed Keisha, who had come down from the stairs, and spun her around. We did it, baby, he screamed. $950,000. We are rich. We are saved. Keisha laughed, hugging him tight. Oh, thank God, she said. Thank God. I was so worried about Vinny. Who is Vinny? I asked, stepping into the room, blinking innocently. Is he coming to dinner? Brent stopped spinning. He looked at me. His face was flushed with adrenaline and arrogance. He walked over to me and put his hands on my shoulders. His grip was hard, almost painful. No, Julius Vinny isn't coming to dinner, he said, his voice dripping with condescension. Vinny is a problem we just solved. And you helped. I helped, I repeated, acting confused. Yes, you helped by being exactly who you are, he said. A confused old man sitting on a gold mine. You are going to make us very happy, Julius. I am glad, I said. I just want you to be happy. You have no idea, Brent said, laughing again. I just closed a client for $950,000. Do you know how much money that is, Julius? That is more money than you ever saw in your life. I had seen more money than that in a single payroll cycle back in '98, but I just nodded. That is a lot of pennies, I whispered. Brent rolled his eyes at Keisha. Pennies, he muttered. He has no clue. He turned back to me, his chest puffed out like a rooster. You are going to be rich, old man, he said. Well, we are going to be rich. You are going to have a very nice room at Shady Pines. It has a window and everything. A window, I said, clapping my hands softly. That is nice. Yeah, it is nice, Brent said. And we are going to take the rest of the money and invest it properly, not like you burying it in coffee cans or whatever you did. We are going to build an empire built on theft and lies, I thought. An empire built on sand. I looked him in the eye. I let a little bit of the real Julius slip through just for a second. Good job, son, I said. My voice was steady. It was deep. I am proud of you. Brent blinked. For a split second, he looked unsettled. He looked like he had heard something he wasn't supposed to hear, a tone of authority, a tone of judgment. But then he shook it off. His ego was too big to let him see the trap. Thanks, Julius, he said, dismissing me with a wave of his hand. Now go downstairs. We have packing to do. We are going to Miami to celebrate before we sign the final papers. Miami. Of course. They were going to spend the money before they even had it. I shuffled toward the basement door. Have fun in Miami, I said. Don't spend it all in one place. I closed the door and locked it. I sat on my cot and listened to them celebrating upstairs. They were popping champagne. They were planning their trip. They thought they had just sold my house for $950,000. They didn't know I had just sold it for $1.2 million. They didn't know that when they came back from Miami, the locks would be changed, the deed would be transferred, and their stuff would be in a storage unit in the worst part of town. I pulled out my phone and looked at the confirmation text from the Preservation Society. It is done, Stone had texted. I deleted the message. I lay back on the pillow and closed my eyes. Pride goeth before destruction, I whispered into the darkness, and a haughty spirit before a fall. Brent was flying high right now, but gravity was a law I knew well, and the higher you go, the harder you hit the concrete. Tuesday morning arrived with the heavy, humid heat of an Atlanta summer, but the air inside my house was cold with lies. I was sitting at the kitchen table nursing a cup of lukewarm water and watching Keisha and Brent pack their bags. They were not packing for a business trip. I knew what business looked like. Business was steel-toed boots and hard hats and blueprints rolled up in tubes. Business was early mornings and late nights and the smell of coffee and diesel. What they were doing was packing for a fantasy. Keisha dragged a massive suitcase down the stairs. It was bright pink and looked expensive, but I knew she had bought it at a discount store 3 towns over. She was wearing oversized sunglasses even though we were inside the house. She looked like she was trying to be someone famous, someone important. We are going to be gone for 5 days, Daddy, she announced, breathless from the exertion of carrying her own luggage for once. Brent and I have very important meetings in Miami. We are meeting with investors, big investors. I nodded slowly, letting my head bob like a dashboard ornament. Investors. I repeated, my voice thin and reedy. For the house. Brent walked into the kitchen. He was wearing a linen suit that was already wrinkling and a straw hat that made him look ridiculous. He was holding a stack of cash. I recognized the wrapper. It was from a payday loan place on Memorial Drive, the kind of place that charged 300% interest. That is right, Julius, he said, stuffing the cash into his pocket. We are meeting with partners to discuss the portfolio. We need to diversify the assets once the house sale clears on Monday. We are going to be moguls, Julius, real estate tycoons. He was lying to me, but worse, he was lying to himself. They were going to Miami to blow the last $5,000 they could borrow on bottle service and beach chairs. They were going to post pictures on Instagram pretending to be rich while the sharks circled the water back home. They were running away from reality, hoping that when they returned, the money would magically be in their account. It sounds nice, I whispered. I like the beach. Beatrice and I went to the beach once. Keisha rolled her eyes behind her sunglasses. We are not going to the beach to play daddy, she said, her voice sharp. We are going to work. This is high-level networking. You wouldn't understand. I understood perfectly. I understood that they were desperate. I understood that Vinny the Shark had given them a deadline and the stress was eating them alive, so they were choosing flight over fight. They were cowards. Brent checked his watch. It was a gold watch, but it was fake. I could tell by the way the second hand ticked instead of sweeping. "We need to hit the road, babe," he said. "We have a reservation at the lounge at 4. He turned to me. The playful mogul act dropped and his face hardened. He walked over to where I was sitting and leaned down. He put his hands on the table on either side of my plate, trapping me. "Listen to me, old man," he said, his voice low and menacing. "While we are gone, you stay in this house. You do not go for walks. You do not talk to the neighbors. You stay in the basement or you stay in the kitchen. Do you understand?" I shrank back in my chair, making myself look small. "Yes, Brent," I said. "I will stay." "You better," he said. He pulled his phone out of his pocket and tapped the screen. He held it up to my face. It was a live feed of the living room. "See this?" he asked. I installed cameras. Julius. Motion activated. Wi-Fi enabled. "I can see everything you do on my phone. If you try to leave, I will know. If you try to mess with anything, I will know. And if I see you doing anything stupid, I will call the police and tell them you are having an episode. I will have them take you straight to Shady Pines tonight. Do not test me." He was bluffing about the police, but the cameras were real. I had watched him install them. They were cheap wireless units he had stuck up in the corners of the rooms with adhesive strips. He thought technology gave him control. He thought an app on his phone made him the master of my house. He didn't know that I had wired this house myself in 1980. He didn't know that I knew exactly which circuit fed the router and which breaker controlled the outlets. "I am watching you always," he said, poking me in the chest with a finger. "Big Brother is watching." I nodded, my eyes wide with feigned terror. "I will be good," I stammered. "I promise." "Good," Keisha said from the doorway. She didn't look at me. She was checking her makeup in the hall mirror. "Bye, Daddy. Don't burn the house down." They picked up their bags. They walked out the door. I heard the trunk of the BMW slam shut. I heard the engine start. I heard the tires squeal as Brent peeled out of the driveway, eager to get to the highway, eager to pretend he was a king for 5 days. I sat at the table and counted to 100. 1, 2, 3. I let the silence of the house wash over me. It was a heavy silence filled with the ghosts of their disrespect. 98, 99, 100. I stood up. I didn't push myself up with my hands. I didn't groan. I stood up using the muscles in my legs, the muscles that had climbed ladders and walked scaffolding for 40 years. I walked to the window. I watched the street. The BMW was gone. I turned around. I rolled my shoulders back. I stretched my neck until it cracked. I wiped the confused expression off my face like I was wiping mud off a boot. The senile old man was gone. Julius Carter, the site superintendent, was back on the clock. I walked to the hallway. I looked up at the little white camera blinking in the corner. "Watch this, Brent," I said out loud. My voice was deep and steady. I walked past the camera and went straight to the garage. The garage was my domain. It smelled of oil and sawdust and capability. I went to the gray metal breaker panel on the back wall. I opened the door. Inside were rows of black switches, each one labeled in my own handwriting. Kitchen, master bed, living room, router. Brent thought the cloud would save him. He thought the internet was invincible. But the internet needs power. And in this house, I controlled the power. I didn't just flip the switch for the router. I wasn't taking any chances. I reached for the main breaker at the top of the panel. The big one, the one that controlled everything. I gripped the handle. "Lights out," I whispered. I pulled the handle down with a solid mechanical clunk. The hum of the refrigerator died. The blinking light on the garage door opener went dark. The house plunged into silence. Inside, the cameras were dead. The Wi-Fi was dead. Brent's window into my world was shattered. I imagined him somewhere on I-75 looking at his phone, cursing because the signal was lost. He would blame the cheap equipment. He would blame the internet provider. He would never suspect that the old man he left behind had simply pulled the plug. I walked back into the house. It was dim and quiet. It was peaceful. I went to the front door and opened it wide. I stood on the porch and looked at the street. A massive truck was turning the corner. It was an 18-wheeler, polished chrome and bright yellow paint. On the side, in giant red letters, it said, "Move it all." I had called them 2 days ago. I had told them I needed a rush job. I told them I needed a whole house packed and moved into storage in 6 hours. I told them I was paying double in cash. The air brakes hissed as the truck pulled up to the curb. It was monstrous. It blocked the sun. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. The driver jumped down from the cab. He was a big man with arms like tree trunks. He looked at the clipboard in his hand, and then he looked at me. "Julius Carter," he asked. "That is me," I said, walking down the steps to meet him. My stride was long and confident. "We are here for the eviction," he said, grinning. "It is not an eviction," I said, shaking his hand. "It is a relocation. We are relocating the trash." I led him and his crew of 4 men into the house. "Everything that does not belong to me or my late wife goes," I said. "The furniture they bought, the clothes in the closet, the dishes in the sink. If it looks cheap and flashy, box it up." "What about the electronics?" one of the movers asked, pointing to the massive TV Brent had bought on credit. "Especially the electronics," I said. "Pack it all." "Where is it going?" the driver asked. "Storage Unit 45 at the U-Store on Industrial Boulevard," I said. I paid for 1 month. After that, it is their problem. The crew got to work. They were professionals. They moved like a colony of ants, stripping the house bare. I went to the master bedroom. I watched them take Keisha's clothes off the hangers. I watched them take Brent's sneaker collection. I went to the drawer where Keisha kept her jewelry. I found my mother's pearl necklace, the one Keisha said she had lost 3 years ago. It was hidden under a pile of cheap costume jewelry. I took it back. I put it in my pocket. I went to the closet and found my old blueprints, the ones Brent hadn't destroyed yet. I rolled them up carefully. By 3 o'clock, the house was an echo chamber. The beige pillows were gone. The abstract art was gone. The smell of Brent's cologne was fading, replaced by the clean scent of cardboard and work. The truck was full. The driver handed me the receipt. "Unit 45, he said. "Key is in the envelope." "Thank you," I said, handing him a thick envelope of cash. They drove away, leaving me standing in an empty house. It was strange. The house felt bigger. It felt like it could breathe again. I walked through the empty rooms. My footsteps echoed on the hardwood floors. I went to the basement and brought up my small suitcase. I brought up my fireproof box. I placed them by the front door. I wasn't staying here tonight. I had rented a penthouse suite at the Four Seasons downtown. I was going to sleep in sheets with a high thread count. I was going to drink whiskey that cost $50 a glass. I was going to celebrate. But first, I had one last thing to do. I took a red envelope from my jacket pocket. It was the kind of envelope I used to use to give Keisha her allowance when she was a little girl. I took a piece of paper and wrote a note. I didn't write it with a shaky hand. I wrote it in the block capital letters of a draftsman. Clear, precise, permanent. I put the note in the envelope. I sealed it. I placed the red envelope in the center of the living room floor. It was the only thing in the room. A single red dot in a sea of empty wood. I walked out the front door. I locked it. I walked down the driveway to where my Mustang was parked under the tarp. I pulled the tarp off. The car gleamed in the afternoon sun, candy apple red, chrome bumper. I got in. The engine roared to life, a deep guttural sound that vibrated in my chest. I backed out of the driveway. I didn't look back at the house. The house was just a building now. The memories were coming with me. I drove toward the city. In 5 days they would return. In 5 days they would put their key in the lock. And in 5 days they would learn that you never underestimate the man who poured the concrete you are standing on. The big yellow truck idled at the curb like a hungry beast waiting to be fed. The air brakes hissed and the diesel engine rumbled a low, steady rhythm that vibrated in the soles of my boots. I stood in the center of the living room, directing the operation with the precision of a conductor leading an orchestra. I had hired the Move It All crew because they were fast and they did not ask questions. The foreman, a man named Mike, who had arms as thick as tree trunks, looked at me for instructions. I pointed to the beige sofa Keisha had bought on credit. I pointed to the abstract art Brent had hung over the fireplace. I pointed to the massive television that had replaced my family photos. "Take it all," I said. "Every single thing that does not look like it was made before 1990 goes into the truck." The crew moved like army ants. They swarmed the house, stripping it bare. I walked into the master bedroom, which Keisha and Brent had claimed as their own. It smelled of her cloying perfume and his cheap body spray, a mixture that made my nose itch. I opened the closet doors. It was an altar to vanity. Rows of designer dresses hung in plastic bags. Stacks of shoeboxes reached the ceiling. I pulled down a box labeled Gucci. Inside were sneakers that cost more than a week of groceries. I tossed the box to one of the movers. Put it in the general storage bin, I ordered. Do not bother with bubble wrap. I moved to the shelf where Keisha kept her handbags. There were dozens of them. Louis Vuitton, Chanel, Prada. I knew for a fact she had not paid off a single one of them. They were trophies of debt. I grabbed them by the straps, handfuls of leather and gold chains, and dumped them into a cardboard box stamped with the word kitchen. It felt good. It felt like I was throwing away their ego. On Brent's side of the closet, I found his watch winder. It was spinning silently, displaying 3 watches that flashed under the closet light. A Rolex, a Breitling, a Tag Heuer. I picked up the Rolex. It felt light. Too light. I turned it over. The engraving on the back was shallow. It was a fake, just like him. I tossed it into the box with the handbags. I cleared out his drawer of silk ties. I cleared out his collection of cologne bottles. I left nothing. I even went into the bathroom and swept their toothbrushes and half-empty bottles of moisturizer into a trash bag. When they went to the storage unit, they would have to dig through everything to find a bar of soap. That was the point. I wanted them to work for it. I wanted them to sweat. Mike came into the room, wiping his forehead with a rag. "We got the upstairs cleared, boss," he said. "What about the electronics?" I looked at the gaming computer Brent had set up in my study. It was a monstrosity with flashing LED lights and 3 monitors. It was sitting on the desk where I used to draw blueprints for community centers. "Pack it," I said, "but do not be too gentle. If a wire gets bent or a screen gets scratched, well, that is just the cost of moving, isn't it?" Mike grinned. He understood. He signaled his guys and they began dismantling Brent's toy. I walked through the house watching 40 years of my life being sorted from 3 months of their occupation. My furniture, my books, my memories were stacked in the dining room. Their clutter, their noise, their debt was disappearing into the belly of the truck. It was a cleansing. It was a purge. I felt the house breathe a sigh of relief as the weight of their presence was lifted from its floors. By the time the movers were done with their stuff, the house echoed. It was just wood and glass and me. Now came the important part. The movers took a break drinking water on the front lawn while I attended to the things that actually mattered. I walked over to the stack of my belongings in the dining room. I did not trust anyone else with these. I picked up my red metal toolbox. It was scratched and dented, covered in stickers from job sites dating back to 1978. It weighed 50 pounds, but to me it felt like a feather. Inside were the hammers that built this house, the levels that kept it straight, and the wrenches that kept it running. I carried it out to the trunk of my rental car myself. I went back inside for the box of photographs. I sat on the floor and opened the lid just to check. There she was, Beatrice, smiling at me from a picnic in Piedmont Park, holding Keisha when she was a baby, standing next to me when I got my foreman promotion. I ran my thumb over her face. "I am sorry they disrespected you, B," I whispered. "I am fixing it. I promise I am fixing it." I closed the box and taped it shut, sealing the memories tight against the coming storm. Then I remembered the jewelry. I had cleared out Keisha's closet, but I hadn't checked the hidden drawer in the vanity, the one Beatrice used to use. I walked back into the master bedroom. I pulled the drawer all the way out. In the back, tucked behind a pile of cheap costume jewelry earrings, was a small velvet pouch. My heart hammered against my ribs. I recognized that pouch. I opened it and poured the contents into my calloused palm. A string of pearls. Genuine Akoya pearls with a white gold clasp. I had bought these for Beatrice for our 30th anniversary. I had saved for 6 months to afford them. After the funeral, I couldn't find them. Keisha had told me they must have gotten lost at the hospital, or maybe Mom was wearing them. She had lied to my face. She had stolen them from her dead mother and hidden them under a pile of plastic junk. The rage that flared in my chest was white-hot. It wasn't about the money, it was about the violation. She had taken the symbol of my love for her mother and treated it like a trinket. I clenched my fist around the pearls, feeling them bite into my skin. I would not put these in a box. I put them in the breast pocket of my shirt right over my heart. I patted the pocket. They were safe now. They were coming with me. I went out to the garage. The tarp was already off the Mustang. She was a beauty, a 1968 fastback in candy apple red. I had restored her bolt by bolt. Brent had asked me once how much I thought he could get for it if he sold it for scrap. I had almost hit him then. I opened the door and slid into the leather seat. It smelled of old leather and gasoline. I turned the key. The engine roared to life, a deep, guttural growl that shook dust from the rafters. I backed her out into the driveway. She shone in the afternoon sun, a diamond in a sea of asphalt. This car was not going to storage. This car was going to the valet parking at the luxury hotel where I would be staying. I walked back up the driveway one last time to do a final sweep. The house was empty. The walls were bare. The floors were swept. It looked exactly as it had the day Beatrice and I bought it 40 years ago. It was ready for its new life. It was ready to be a museum. It was ready to be respected again. I was locking the front door when I heard a throat clear behind me. I didn't have to turn around to know who it was. Mrs. Johnson, the neighborhood news network. She lived 2 doors down and spent her entire life peeking through her blinds. If a squirrel crossed the street, Mrs. Johnson knew where it was going and why. "Hello, Julius," she called out. Her voice was high and syrupy. "I see a lot of activity over here today. Moving trucks. Noise. Is everything all right?" I turned around slowly, putting on my best performance. I straightened my back. I smiled a wide, bright smile that showed all my teeth. I did not look like a confused old man. I looked like a man who had just won the lottery. "Hello, Gladys," I said. "Everything is better than all right. Everything is fantastic." She blinked, surprised by my tone. She was expecting the shuffling, mumbling Julius she had seen for the last week. "Oh," she said, stepping closer, her eyes darting to the empty house behind me. I heard, "Well, Keisha told me you might be moving to a facility. For your health." I laughed a rich, deep belly laugh. "Keisha likes to joke," I said. "No, Gladys, I am not going to a facility. I am moving up." "Up?" she asked, her curiosity twitching like a cat's tail. "Yes, ma'am," I said, leaning against the doorframe casually. "You know Keisha and Brent have done so well for themselves. Brent's investments finally paid off big time. They decided this old house was just too much work for me. They want me to relax." Mrs. Johnson's eyes narrowed. Envy was creeping into her expression. "Is that so?" she said. "Absolutely," I lied smoothly. "They hired a top-tier contractor to come in and gut this place. They are going to flip it for a fortune. And in the meantime, they rented me a penthouse downtown. Concierge service. Heated pool. The works. They said, 'Dad, you worked hard your whole life. Now it is time for us to spoil you.'" Mrs. Johnson looked like she had swallowed a lemon. She hated hearing about other people's good fortune almost as much as she loved hearing about their misfortune. "A penthouse," she repeated. "That must be expensive." "Money is no object for Brent," I said, waving my hand dismissively. He insisted. He said nothing but the best for Julius. "They are treating me like a king, Gladys. I am telling you, I raised that girl right." I could see the gears turning in her head. She was already planning who she would call first. She would tell everyone that Keisha and Brent were rich, that they were generous, that they were successful. And that was exactly what I wanted. I wanted the rumor mill to churn. I wanted the expectations to be high. I wanted everyone in the neighborhood to think Keisha and Brent were on top of the world, because when they came back and found themselves locked out and homeless, the humiliation would be public. It would be total. The higher the pedestal, the harder the fall. "Well, isn't that nice for you?" Mrs. Johnson said, her smile tight and forced. "We will miss you around here, Julius. I will pop by in the Mustang sometimes," I said, pointing to the gleaming red car in the driveway. "Just to check on the renovations. You take care now, Gladys." I turned and walked to my car. I didn't look back. I got in and revved the engine. I waved at Mrs. Johnson as I pulled away, leaving her standing on the sidewalk green with envy and bursting with false information. I drove toward the city skyline. My plan was perfect. My house was sold, my assets were safe, and my trap was set. Now all I had to do was wait for the rats to come home and find the cheese was gone. Monday morning arrived with the crisp efficiency of a well-poured foundation. I was dressed in my best suit, a charcoal gray wool number that Beatrice had picked out for me 5 years ago. It still fit perfectly because, unlike my son-in-law, I respected the things I owned. I walked into Mr. Stone's office at 8:55. I was not early, and I was not late. I was on time because that is what professionals do. The conference room smelled of lemon polish and serious money. Stone was there sitting at the head of the table. To his right sat Dr. Eris Thorne, the director of the Heritage Preservation Society. He was a tall man with dreadlocks tied back neatly and a pair of spectacles that made him look like a professor. He stood up when I entered and extended a hand that felt like it had done honest work. "Mr. Carter, it is an honor," he said. "I have admired your work on the Ebenezer Project for decades. We are committed to preserving your legacy." I shook his hand firmly. "Thank you, Dr. Thorne. Just make sure the history is told right. That is all I ask." We sat down. The paperwork was stacked in the center of the table. It was a mountain of legal documents, but unlike the forgery Brent had tried to pass off, these were legitimate. The title search was clean. The deed was ready. Stone slid the papers toward me. "As the sole manager of Beatrice Legacy LLC, you have the authority to execute this sale." Stone said, his voice calm and professional. "Once you sign these, the property belongs to the society. There is no turning back." I picked up the heavy fountain pen. I didn't hesitate. I didn't think about the Christmas mornings in that house or the summers spent on the porch. Those memories were in my head and in my heart, not in the drywall. The house had become a prison, and I was signing my release papers. I signed Julius Carter, manager. I signed it again and again on every page. The scratch of the pen on the paper was the only sound in the room. It was the sound of a trap snapping shut. When I finished, Stone slid a cashier's check across the mahogany table. $1,200,000. I looked at the number. It was a lot of zeros. It represented 40 years of waking up at 4 in the morning. It represented missed dinners and working weekends. It represented the sweat I had poured into the earth of this city. But more than that, it represented freedom. I folded the check and put it in my inside pocket right next to the velvet pouch holding Beatrice's pearls. "It is done," I said. Dr. Thorne smiled. "We have big plans, Mr. Carter. We are going to turn the workshop into a classroom for young apprentices. We want to teach the next generation how to build things that last." "That is good," I said. "Teach them that a house is only as strong as its foundation, and teach them to never let anyone treat them like they are invisible." Now came the hard part. The part that required precision. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a heavy ring of keys. There were keys for the front door, the back door, the garage, the workshop, and the basement. I held them in my hand, feeling their weight one last time. "Dr. Thorne," I said, looking him dead in the eye, "I need you to listen to me very carefully." He leaned forward, sensing the shift in my tone. "These are the keys," I said, placing them on the table. "But I am advising you as the former owner and as a man who knows what is coming to take immediate security measures." "Security measures?" Thorne asked, frowning. "Is the neighborhood unsafe?" "The neighborhood is fine," I said, "but there are squatters, relatives of mine. They believe they own the house. They are currently out of town, but they will be back in 5 days. When they return, they are going to try to enter the property." Stone cleared his throat. "Mr. Carter is advising you to secure your asset, Dr. Thorne. His daughter and son-in-law are under the impression that the property belongs to them. They have no legal claim, but they have keys." Thorne's eyes widened behind his spectacles. "I see," he said slowly. "You need to change every lock today." I said, my voice hard. "Not tomorrow. Today. Before noon. And you need to hire security. Not a mall cop. You need a licensed armed guard on the property 24 hours a day for the next week," Armed Stone asked, raising an eyebrow. "My son-in-law is desperate," I said. "He owes money to bad people. When he realizes his meal ticket is gone, he might get violent. I do not want your staff getting hurt." Thorne nodded slowly, absorbing the gravity of the situation. He picked up his phone and dialed a number. "Make it happen immediately," he said into the receiver. "I want a locksmith at the Carter property in 20 minutes, and call the security firm. I want a 24-hour detail starting now. Yes, armed, no trespassers." I sat back in my chair. It was done. The fortress was secured. When Brent and Keisha rolled up in their BMW expecting to walk into their mansion, they would be walking into a fortress guarded by men with guns and legal paperwork. Dr. Thorne stood up and shook my hand again. "We will take care of it, Mr. Carter. Nobody will set foot on that property without authorization." I walked out of the office and into the bright Atlanta sunshine. The air tasted different. It tasted clean. I walked 2 blocks to the parking garage where the valet had my Mustang waiting. I tipped him $50 just because I could. I drove through the city, navigating the traffic with the ease of a man who had helped pave the roads. I drove toward the skyline, toward the gleaming glass towers of downtown. I pulled up to the residences at the Four Seasons. The valet opened my door. "Welcome back, Mr. Carter," he said. I took the elevator to the 45th floor. It moved so smoothly I could barely feel it rising. The doors opened directly into the penthouse. I walked in. The space was massive. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city I had spent my life building. From here, the cars looked like toys, and the people looked like ants. The floors were marble, cool, and white. The furniture was leather and steel, modern and masculine. But the best thing about the penthouse was what wasn't there. There was no smell of Brent's cheap body spray. There was no clutter of Keisha's unpaid bills. There was no beige art. There was no condescension. There was no pity. It smelled of emptiness and potential. It smelled of peace. I walked to the kitchen island, which was a slab of granite the size of a landing strip. I placed my small suitcase on the counter. I opened it. I took out my red toolbox. I set it down on the marble. It looked out of place, scratched and dented against the pristine stone, but to me it was the most valuable thing in the room. I took out the fireproof box. I placed it next to the toolbox. Then I reached into my pocket and took out the bottle I had smuggled out of the house in my jacket, the Pappy Van Winkle. I found a crystal glass in the cabinet. It was heavy, substantial. I poured 2 fingers of the amber liquid. The smell of oak and caramel filled the air. I walked to the window. I looked out at the city. Somewhere down there in the tangle of streets and trees was my old house, my old life. It was already changing hands. Locks were being drilled. Signs were being posted. I raised the glass to the glass. I saw my reflection. I didn't see an old man. I saw a survivor. I pulled the photo of Beatrice out of my pocket. I propped it up against the window glass so she could see the view too. "We did it, B," I whispered. "Step 1 is complete. The house is gone. The money is safe. And the rats are in a trap they haven't even seen yet." I took a sip of the bourbon. It burned in the best way possible. It warmed my chest and settled my nerves. I thought about Keisha and Brent in Miami right now. They were probably ordering lobster by the pool, charging it to a room they couldn't afford, laughing about the stupid old man they had left behind. "Laugh while you can," I said to the empty room. "Because when you get home, the only thing waiting for you is a locked door and a hard lesson." I turned away from the window. I had 5 days of luxury ahead of me. 5 days to rest. 5 days to prepare for the finale. I sat down on the leather sofa and put my feet up. I was Julius Carter. I was a millionaire. And I was just getting started. 5 days later, the circus returned to town. I was not there to greet them in person. I was not sitting on the porch in my oily coveralls, and I was not shuffling around the kitchen in my slippers. I was sitting in the back of a tinted sedan parked 3 houses down across the street. I had a clear view of the driveway. I had a thermos of coffee and the air conditioning running. I was comfortable. I was ready. It was 2 in the afternoon on Sunday. The sun was beating down on the asphalt, baking the neighborhood in a shimmering heat haze. The BMW turned the corner. It looked worse for wear. It was covered in road dust and dead bugs from the long drive up from Florida. Brent was driving too fast as usual. He swung the car into the driveway, carrying enough speed to leave skid marks on the concrete I had poured myself 30 years ago. They got out of the car. They looked ridiculous. Brent was wearing a tropical shirt unbuttoned halfway down his chest, exposing a sunburn that turned his skin the color of a boiled shrimp. He was wearing white loafers without socks. Keisha was wearing an oversized sun hat and a maxi dress that dragged on the ground. They looked like tourists who had gotten lost on their way to a yacht club. They were smiling. They were laughing. I could see their teeth flashing in the sun. They were high on the fumes of a vacation they could not afford, paid for with credit they did not have. They were probably already spending the $950,000 in their heads. I imagined the conversation in the car. Brent probably promised her a new car. Keisha probably promised him a new watch. They were building castles in the sky while standing in a pit of quicksand. Brent walked around to the trunk and popped it open. He pulled out suitcases stuffed with souvenirs and dirty laundry. He set them on the driveway with a heavy thud. Keisha grabbed a handful of shopping bags. They walked toward the house expecting to find a confused old man waiting to serve them sandwiches. They expected to find their kingdom exactly as they left it, ready for the plucking. I took a sip of coffee. It was black and strong. "Watch this stone," I said to the empty car. "Watch them break." They walked up the front steps. Brent was whistling. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his key ring. He jingled it arrogantly. He was the master of the house. He was the man in charge. He stepped up to the front door. He didn't even look at the lock. He just jammed the key toward the hole, expecting it to slide in smooth as butter. Clink. Metal hit metal. The key didn't go in. Brent frowned. He looked at the key. He looked at the lock. He tried again. He wiggled it. He pushed harder. It didn't budge. Of course it didn't budge. I had instructed Dr. Thorne to install high-security deadbolts, Medico locks, drill-proof, pick-proof, and definitely Brent-proof. "What is wrong?" Keisha asked, standing behind him with her bags. "Open the door, Brent. It is hot out here. It is stuck," Brent said. He jiggled the handle. The door was solid. It didn't give a millimeter. The old man must have messed with it. He probably jammed something in there. He tried the key again, twisting it with enough force to bend brass. "Open the damn door, Julius," he shouted, pounding on the wood with his fist. "I know you are in there. Open up." Silence. The house stared back at them, blank and imposing. The blinds were drawn. The windows were dark. It looked like a fortress. Keisha dropped her bags on the porch. She looked annoyed, not scared, not yet. "Daddy," she screamed. "Daddy, wake up! It is us. We are home. Stop playing games." Nothing happened. No shuffling footsteps, no confused mumbles, just the heat and the cicadas buzzing in the trees. "He probably fell asleep," Brent said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Or he forgot how to unlock it. Useless old man. I told you we should have put him in the home before we left." "Go around back," Keisha said. "Maybe the kitchen door is open." Brent nodded. He hopped off the porch and stomped through my flower beds, crushing the petunias Beatrice had loved. He disappeared around the side of the house. I watched Keisha. She was tapping her foot impatiently, checking her phone. She was probably texting her friends, telling them she was back at her estate. She checked her reflection in the window, trying to fix her hair. She had no idea she was standing on property she was trespassing on. 2 minutes later, Brent came storming back around the corner. He looked furious. His face was redder than his sunburn. "The back door is locked too," he said. "And the key doesn't fit that one either. It is a brand new lock, Keisha, shiny silver. It wasn't there when we left." Keisha froze. Her hand stopped midway to her hair. "New lock," she repeated. "How could he change the locks, Brent? He doesn't even know what day it is. He thinks you are the dog." "I don't know," Brent snapped, kicking the front door again. "Maybe he called a locksmith by accident. Maybe he broke it and someone fixed it. I don't know, but I am going to break a window if he doesn't open up in 3 seconds. He pounded on the door again. The sound echoed down the street. "Julius, open this door or I am going to kick it in," he roared. "Do you hear me? I own this house. I own you. Open up." He backed up, preparing to throw his shoulder against the solid oak door. He was going to try to break it down. I leaned forward in my seat. This was it. Before Brent could launch himself at the door, it swung open. But it wasn't Julius Carter standing there. It wasn't a frail old man in a cardigan. It was a mountain. The man standing in the doorway was 6'5" and built like a linebacker. He was wearing a black uniform with a patch on the shoulder that said Titan Security. He had a utility belt with a baton handcuffs and a holstered sidearm. He wore sunglasses that hid his eyes completely. And he wasn't alone. Flanking him on either side were 2 Dobermans. They were sleek black machines of muscle and teeth. They sat perfectly still, their ears pricked forward, their eyes locked on Brent. They didn't bark, they just watched. Brent froze mid-stride. He stumbled backward, nearly tripping over Keisha's shopping bags. He looked like a child who had just run into a wall. "Who the hell are you?" Brent stammered. "Where is Julius?" The security guard didn't smile. He didn't blink. He crossed his massive arms over his chest. "You are trespassing," he said. His voice was deep and flat, like gravel crunching under tires. "Step off the porch," Keisha pushed forward, her indignation overriding her fear. "Trespassing," she shrieked. "We live here. That is my father's house. Who are you? What have you done with him? Did you hurt him?" The guard didn't move. He just pointed a gloved finger toward the street. "This property is owned by the Heritage Preservation Society," he said. I am the authorized security detail. You have 5 seconds to remove yourselves and your vehicle from the premises before I release the dogs and call the police. Heritage Preservation Society. Brent repeated the words sounding like gibberish in his mouth. What are you talking about? We are selling this house tomorrow. We have a contract. You have nothing, the guard said. One of the dogs let out a low rumble, a growl that you could feel in your bones. It stepped forward, straining against the invisible leash of its training. Brent looked at the dog. He looked at the gun on the guard's hip. He looked at the closed door behind the man. The reality was starting to crack his delusion. The arrogance was draining out of him, replaced by a cold, creeping terror. Keisha grabbed Brent's arm. Her fingernails dug into his linen jacket. "Brent," she whispered. "Where is Daddy? What is happening?" "He is gone, Keisha," Brent said, his voice rising in panic. "He isn't here. This guy did something. He scammed us." He looked at the guard again, trying to summon some of his usual bluster. "Listen, pal," he said, pointing a shaking finger. "I don't know what game you are playing, but that old man inside is mentally incompetent. Anything he signed is void. I have power of attorney. I am the legal guardian." The guard reached into his pocket. He didn't pull out a weapon. He pulled out a red envelope. It was the envelope I had left in the center of the living room floor. He held it out. "Mr. Carter left this for you," the guard said. "He said you would need it to understand your new living arrangements." Keisha snatched the envelope. Her hands were shaking so bad she almost dropped it. She tore it open. I watched through the tinted glass of my car. I knew every word written on that paper. I had written it myself with a steady hand and a clear mind. Keisha unfolded the letter. Brent leaned over her shoulder, reading along. I saw the moment the words hit them. I saw Keisha's knees buckle. She grabbed the porch railing to keep from falling. Her mouth opened in a silent scream. The color drained from her face, leaving her looking gray and sick under her tan. Brent read faster. He snatched the paper from her hand. He read it again, his eyes scanning the lines, desperately looking for a loophole, looking for a lie. He didn't find one. He found the truth. He found out that Beatrice Legacy LLC owned the house. He found out that I knew about Vinny. He found out about the storage unit. He found out that the nursing home he tried to put me in was the only place left that might take him in. No. Brent screamed. It was a primal sound. A sound of total defeat. No, no, no. He crumpled the letter in his fist. He looked at the house. He looked at the guard. "You can't do this," he yelled. "We have a buyer. We have $950,000 coming. Vinny is going to kill me." The guard took a step forward. The dog stood up. "That sounds like a personal problem," the guard said. "You have 3 seconds left." 1. Brent looked at the dogs. He looked at Keisha, who was sobbing on the steps. He looked at the BMW, which was now his only home. 2, the guard said. Brent grabbed Keisha by the arm. He dragged her up. "Come on," he said, his voice cracking. "We have to go. We have to find him. We have to fix this." "There is no fixing this," Keisha wailed. "He knows Brent. He knows everything." 3, the guard said. He unclipped the strap on his holster. Brent didn't wait. He grabbed the suitcases. He threw them toward the car. He dragged Keisha down the steps. They ran. They actually ran toward the car like the devil himself was snapping at their heels. They threw their bags in the back seat, not even bothering with the trunk. They jumped in. Brent fumbled with the keys, dropping them on the floorboard before finally jamming them into the ignition. The BMW roared to life. He threw it into reverse, backing out of the driveway so fast he scraped the bottom of the bumper on the curb. I watched them go. I watched them speed away down the street, fleeing from the house they thought they owned, fleeing from the consequences they thought they could outrun. The security guard watched them go, too. Then he looked across the street directly at my tinted car. He nodded once. A sharp, professional nod. I nodded back. I put the car in gear. I drove slowly past my old house. I looked at the for sale sign that wasn't there. I looked at the dead petunias. I looked at the fortress I had built to keep the monsters out. It was done. The house was gone. But my dignity was intact. I drove toward the city, following the path of my fleeing children. I wasn't going to help them. I wasn't going to save them. But I wasn't done with them either. The house was just the first domino. The rest were about to fall. And I wanted a front row seat for the collapse. I watched from the safety of my tinted windows as the reality of their situation began to set in like concrete hardening in the sun. Keisha was losing her mind right there on the front lawn. She was screaming at the security guard, a man who looked like he could bench press her BMW without breaking a sweat. She was pointing at the house at the windows at the door that was now forever closed to her. "This is my house," she shrieked, her voice cracking and splitting in the humid afternoon air. "My father lives here. He is a sick old man. You probably killed him. I am calling the police. I am calling my lawyer. You cannot keep me out of my own inheritance." The guard did not flinch. He stood on the porch with his arms crossed, his dark sunglasses reflecting the distorted image of my daughter unraveling. The Dobermans at his side let out a low, synchronized growl, a sound that vibrated through the air like a warning shot. Keisha stomped her foot on the walkway, a petulant child in a grown woman's body. She grabbed the railing of the porch, trying to push past the guard. It was a mistake. The guard simply stepped forward, blocking her path with a wall of black uniform and muscle. He did not touch her, but his presence was enough to send her stumbling backward, her high heels catching on the pavement. She fell hard, landing on her backside on the concrete. Her expensive dress tore, her sun hat flew off, rolling into the dirt. She looked pathetic. She looked exactly like what she was, a spoiled child who had finally been told no. Brent was standing behind her, useless as always. He was wiping sweat from his forehead, his eyes darting around the neighborhood as if looking for an escape route. He knew better than to charge the guard. He was a coward who only fought people who could not fight back, like old men with canes. "Get up, Keisha," he hissed, trying to pull her to her feet. "You are making a scene. The neighbors are watching." "Let them watch," she screamed, slapping his hand away. "They stole our house, Brent. They stole our money. Do something. Be a man for once in your life." Brent flinched at that. He looked at the guard, and then he looked at the ground. He had no fight left in him. The guard reached into his breast pocket. The movement was slow and deliberate. Keisha flinched, thinking he was reaching for a weapon, but he pulled out something much smaller, something red. It was an envelope, a small rectangular red envelope. I leaned forward in my car seat, my hands gripping the steering wheel. I knew that envelope. I had bought a box of them 20 years ago. Beatrice and I used to use them for special occasions. We used them to give Keisha her allowance when she did her chores. We used them to give her gas money when she went to college. We used them to give her a down payment for her first car. That red envelope had always meant love. It had always meant support. It had always meant that her parents were there to catch her, but not today. Today it meant the end. "Here," the guard said, his voice flat. "Mr. Carter left this for you. He said you would recognize it." He held it out. The red paper was bright against his black glove. Keisha stared at it. Her breathing hitched. She recognized it instantly. She knew what that envelope represented. She reached out her hand, trembling violently. Her fingers brushed the paper. She took it like it was made of glass. She sat there on the concrete, holding the red envelope, staring at her name written on the front. I had written it in black ink in the block letters I used on architectural drawings. "Keisha and Brent. Open it." Brent ordered, his voice tight with panic. "Read it. Maybe he left us a check. Maybe he left us instructions." Keisha tore the flap open. Her movements were jerky and desperate. She pulled out a single sheet of folded yellow legal paper. She unfolded it. I sat back in my car and closed my eyes for a second, visualizing the words I had written. I didn't need to read them. I had memorized them. I spoke them in my mind, my voice joining the silence of the street as my daughter began to read. "Dear Keisha and Brent, I imagine you are standing on the porch right now wondering why your key does not fit. You are wondering where the confused old man went. You are wondering where your $950,000 is. Let me clear up the confusion. I was never confused. I was never senile. I was never lost. 2 weeks ago, you called me to ask if I had eaten dinner. You forgot to hang up the phone, Keisha. I heard everything. I heard Brent say I had to go to a nursing home tonight. I heard you agree with him. I heard you plotting to declare me incompetent. I heard you laughing about selling the house Beatrice and I built with our own hands. I know about the gambling Brent. I know about Vinny. I know about the $200,000 you owe to people who break legs for a living. I broke into your laptop. Money is king is a terrible password for a man with no money. I know about the credit cards, Keisha. I know about the $50,000 in debt you racked up buying purses to impress people who do not care about you. You thought I was a helpless old man. You thought I was a burden. You thought I was a piggy bank you could smash open whenever you needed cash. You were wrong. I am Julius Carter. I was a site superintendent for 40 years. I know how to spot a crack in the foundation, and I know how to bring a condemned building down safely. This house does not belong to you. It never did. It belongs to Beatrice Legacy, LLC. And as the sole manager of that company, I decided to liquidate the asset. I sold the house, Keisha. I sold it 5 days ago to the Heritage Preservation Society. They paid $1.2 million in cash. The money is already in an offshore account that you will never find and could never touch even if you did. As for your belongings, I did not want them in my house. I hired movers. They packed everything you own. Your clothes, your fake watches, your expensive shoes. It is all currently sitting in Storage Unit 45 at the You Store It facility on Industrial Boulevard. You know the one. It is next to the sewage treatment plant. I paid for the first month. After that, you are on your own. I suggest you go there quickly. It is not a very secure facility, and I hear things have a way of disappearing in that neighborhood. I am not going to Shady Pines. I am sitting in a penthouse suite drinking Pappy Van Winkle and looking at the city I helped build. Do not look for me. Do not call me, and do not try to sue me. My lawyer, Mr. Stone, has copies of the forged listing agreement you signed, Brent. He has copies of your financial records. If you try to come after me, I will hand everything over to the district attorney, and you will go to prison for fraud and elder abuse. You wanted me out of your life. You got your wish. I hope Miami was worth it. Goodbye, Dad. I watched Keisha finish reading. The paper slipped from her fingers and drifted to the ground like a dead leaf. She did not scream again. She did not cry. She just sat there staring at nothing, her mouth open, her face draining of all color until she looked like a ghost. The reality of what she had done crushed her. The weight of her own greed collapsed on top of her. She looked at the house she grew up in, the house she thought was her birthright. It was a fortress now, a museum. And she was on the outside. Brent snatched the paper from the ground. He read it. His eyes moved back and forth frantically, scanning the lines, searching for a loophole, searching for a joke, searching for anything that would tell him this was not real. He didn't find it. He read the part about the gambling debt. He read the part about Vinny. He read the part about the sale closing 5 days ago. His legs gave out. He didn't sit down, he collapsed. He fell to his knees in the dry grass beside the driveway. The letter crumpled in his fist. He let out a sound that was not human. It was a strangled animal noise, a keen of pure terror. No, he whispered. No, no, no. This cannot be happening. He looked up at the sky as if begging God to rewind the tape. 1.2 million, he choked out. He had it. He had it the whole time. He looked at Keisha. His eyes were wild. He knows Keisha. Brent screamed. He knows about Vinny. He knows about the money. Keisha looked at him slowly. Her eyes were dead. He sold the house, she whispered. Daddy sold the house. And then it happened. The sound that sealed his fate. Brent's phone rang. It was in his jacket pocket. It was a loud, cheerful ringtone, a pop song that sounded grotesque in the heavy silence of the moment. Brent froze. He didn't want to answer it. He knew who it was. He knew why they were calling. He reached into his pocket with a shaking hand. He pulled out the phone. He looked at the screen. Even from across the street, I could see him shudder. It is him, Brent whispered. It is Vinny. The phone kept ringing, singing about dancing and parties. Answer it, Keisha hissed. Tell him we need more time. Tell him we have the money coming. We don't have the money, Brent yelled, throwing the phone onto the grass. We don't have anything, Keisha. The house is gone. The old man is gone. We are dead. He scrambled backward on the grass, moving away from the ringing phone like it was a bomb. I watched him unravel. This was the man who had kicked my boots. This was the man who had thrown my wife's picture in the trash. This was the man who had called me useless. Now he was on his knees in the dirt crying because a man named Vinny was calling to collect a debt he could never pay. The phone stopped ringing. A second later it chimed with a text message. Brent stared at it. He didn't pick it up. He didn't have to. He knew what it said. Time is up. I watched them for another minute. Two broken people sitting in the wreckage of their own making. They had everything handed to them and they threw it away because they wanted more. They wanted what was mine. I put the car in gear. The engine purred. The security guard looked up. He saw my car. He didn't wave. He just stood there holding the line, protecting my legacy. I pulled away from the curb. I drove slowly past them. I wanted to remember this. I wanted to remember the look on Brent's face when he realized that the senile old man had outsmarted him. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel happiness. I felt satisfaction. It was the satisfaction of a job well done. The demolition was complete. The site was cleared. I turned the corner and the house disappeared from my rearview mirror. I left them there on the lawn with nothing but a red envelope and a ringing phone. They had 30 days to pay Vinny, but they didn't have 30 days anymore. They had 0 days, they had $0, and they had 0 places to go. I drove back toward the city, toward the penthouse, toward the future. I was Julius Carter, and I was free. The sun went down over Atlanta, but for my daughter and her husband, the darkness had started hours ago. They drove the BMW to a Motel 6 on the outskirts of town, far away from the country clubs they pretended to belong to. It was a place where the neon sign buzzed like an angry hornet, and the asphalt smelled of oil and despair. I wasn't there, but I knew exactly what happened because I had set the dominoes in motion myself. Brent walked into the lobby with his chest puffed out, trying to act like a king in exile. He threw a credit card on the counter. It was a platinum card. It was shiny. It was also linked to a secondary account under my name that I had forgotten to close years ago until yesterday. I had called the fraud department at 9 a.m. sharp. I told them my identity had been compromised. I told them unauthorized users were draining my funds. The bank froze everything. The clerk ran the card, declined. Brent frowned. He told the clerk to run it again. Declined. He pulled out another card. This one was Keisha's. Declined. They had maxed it out in Miami. He tried a third card. Declined. I imagined the look on his face. The slow, dawning realization that the financial faucet had been turned off at the main valve. He had to walk back out to the car where Keisha was waiting with her air conditioning and her attitude. He tapped on the window. "We have to sleep in the car," he said. Keisha screamed. I know she screamed because she always screamed when the world refused to bend to her will. She probably hit the dashboard. She probably threw her sunglasses. But in the end, she had no choice. They had no cash. They had no friends. They had burned every bridge they ever crossed. They parked the BMW in the back corner of a Walmart parking lot under a flickering street lamp. It was 90 degrees with 90% humidity. They couldn't run the engine all night because they were low on gas and didn't have money to fill the tank, so they rolled the windows down. That was their first night of freedom, sleeping upright in leather seats, sweating through their linen clothes, listening to the sounds of the city they thought they owned. They fought. Of course they fought. Rats always turn on each other when the ship sinks. "This is your fault," Keisha hissed. "You and your gambling. You and your stupid investments. If you hadn't owed money to Vinny, we could have waited. We could have been smart." "My fault," Brent shouted back. "You were the one who bought $5,000 worth of shoes last month. You were the one who said your father was senile. You said he was a vegetable, Keisha. You said he wouldn't notice if we moved in. He noticed everything. He played us like a fiddle." They argued until their voices were hoarse. They blamed me. They blamed the economy. They blamed bad luck. They blamed everyone except the people looking back at them in the rearview mirror. They eventually fell into an uneasy sleep, exhausted by their own toxicity. But sleep didn't bring safety. It just brought the sharks closer. While they were arguing, Brent had made a mistake. A fatal amateur mistake. In his panic earlier that day, he had turned on his phone to check his sports betting app, hoping for a miracle win to save him. He didn't place a bet, but the app registered his location. It pinged a tower. Vinny didn't hire debt collectors who knocked on doors. He hired hunters. They had been tracking Brent's digital footprint for weeks, waiting for him to land. It happened at 3 in the morning. The BMW was jolted awake. A heavy object smashed into the driver's side window, shattering the safety glass into 1,000 diamonds. Brent woke up screaming. Keisha scrambled into the back seat, trying to hide. 2 men dragged Brent out of the car through the broken window. They didn't ask for the money. They knew he didn't have it. This wasn't a collection call. This was a message. They threw him onto the pavement. One man held him down. He was big, silent, and efficient. The other man held a tire iron. I wasn't there to see it, but I know how these things work. I grew up in neighborhoods where street justice was the only justice. "Please," Brent begged. "Please, I can get the money. My father-in-law just sold his house. He has millions. I can get it." The man with the tire iron laughed. It was a dry, dusty sound. "Your father-in-law isn't the one who owes us, Brent," he said. "You are." Keisha was screaming inside the car, fumbling for her phone, trying to call 911. But her fingers were shaking too hard, and the signal was weak. The man raised the iron. "This is for the interest," he said. He brought it down. There was a sickening crunch, the sound of a radius and ulna snapping under pressure. Brent howled. It was a high, thin sound that cut through the humid night. They didn't kill him. Dead men can't pay debts. They just broke his right arm, the arm he used to roll dice, the arm he used to forge my signature. We will be back for the left one next week, the man said. Then they got in their black SUV and drove away, leaving Brent writhing on the asphalt, cradling his shattered arm, while Keisha sobbed uselessly in the back seat of a car filled with broken glass. They went to the county hospital. They had to. Brent needed surgery. They sat in the waiting room for 6 hours because they didn't have insurance. I had canceled Brent's policy 3 days ago. It was part of the purge. While Brent was in surgery getting pins put in his arm, Keisha tried one last desperate play. She called a lawyer. Not just any lawyer. She called a billboard lawyer, the kind who advertised on late-night TV and promised to sue anyone for anything. She told him a story. She told him I was mentally incompetent. She told him I had been coerced into selling the house. She told him I had stolen her inheritance. She wanted to sue me for fraud, elder abuse, and emotional distress. She wanted an emergency injunction to freeze my assets. The lawyer smelled blood. He drafted a cease and desist letter. He drafted a notice of intent to sue. He sent it to Mr. Stone's office at 9 a.m. the next morning, marked urgent. I was sitting in Stone's office when the email came through. Stone read it and laughed. It was a deep, genuine belly laugh. "They want to sue you, Julius," he said, wiping a tear from his eye. "They are accusing you of financial abuse. They say you tricked them." I took a sip of my coffee. "Send the package, Stone," I said. Stone opened a file on his computer. He attached 3 files to a reply email. File 1 was the digital recording from my garage, the one where they planned to put me in a nursing home and sell my house to pay off gambling debts. Their voices were clear, crisp, and damning. File 2 was the photo of the forged listing agreement, the one Brent had signed with my name while I spilled coffee on the table. File 3 was a scanned copy of the police report I had filed yesterday afternoon regarding the theft of my wife's pearls. I had listed Keisha as the primary suspect. Stone typed a short message to go with the files. "Dear Counselor, before you proceed with this frivolous lawsuit, I suggest you listen to the attached audio evidence of your clients conspiring to commit elder abuse and fraud. I also suggest you review the attached evidence of forgery and grand larceny. My client, Mr. Julius Carter, is prepared to file criminal charges with the district attorney immediately. However, he is willing to withhold these files if your clients agree to sign a permanent restraining order and never contact him again. If they proceed with this lawsuit, they will be doing it from a prison cell. Govern yourself accordingly." Stone hit send. We waited. It didn't take long. 10 minutes later, Stone's phone rang. It was the billboard lawyer. "Mr. Stone," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "I have reviewed the files. I was misinformed by my clients regarding the nature of their relationship with your client." "I bet you were," Stone said, leaning back in his chair. "I am dropping the case immediately," the lawyer said. "I am also firing them as clients. I do not represent criminals." "Good choice," Stone said. "Have a nice day." He hung up. It was over. The legal threat was vaporized. The physical threat had been delivered by Vinny. The financial threat was absolute. Keisha and Brent were sitting in a hospital recovery room. Brent had a cast on his arm. Keisha had mascara running down her face. They had no home. They had no money. They had no lawyer. And they knew that if they ever came near me again, I would put them in jail without hesitation. I stood up and walked to the window of Stone's office. I looked out at the city. I wondered if they were finally learning. I wondered if the pain in Brent's arm and the emptiness in Keisha's stomach were enough to teach them the lesson they had refused to learn for 30 years. "You cannot build a life on someone else's foundation," I whispered to the glass. "You have to pour your own concrete." I turned back to Stone. "What now, Julius?" he asked. "Now," I said, buttoning my jacket. "I go to Paris. Beatrice always wanted to see the Eiffel Tower. I think it is time I took her." I walked out of the office. I left the files on the desk. I left the drama behind. I walked to my Mustang. The engine roared. I pointed the car toward the airport. My daughter wanted to get rid of me. She wanted to erase me. Instead, she erased herself. I was not a victim. I was not a burden. I was Julius Carter, and I was just getting started on the best years of my life. 6 months ago, I was sitting on a cot in a basement smelling mildew and listening to my daughter plot my demise. Tonight, I am sitting at a corner table in Le Caveau de la Huchette in the Latin Quarter of Paris. The air here smells of cognac and history. A saxophone player is hitting a low note that vibrates in my chest, kind of like the engine of my Mustang, but smoother. He is playing a melody that Beatrice loved. I close my eyes, and for a moment I can almost feel her hand on my shoulder, keeping time with the rhythm. I am wearing a suit that I had made on Savile Row in London last week. It is midnight blue wool, tailored to fit a man who still stands straight. I am not the shuffling, confused old man anymore. I am Julius Carter. I am 70 years old, and I have never felt more alive. The waiter brings me another glass. He treats me with deference, not because he wants a tip, but because I carry myself like a man who commands respect. That is something Brent never understood. You cannot buy respect with a leased BMW. You have to earn it. You have to build it brick by brick. I look around the club. It is full of life. Young couples dancing, old friends laughing. I am alone at my table, but I am not lonely. Loneliness is living in a house full of people who wish you were dead. Solitude is sitting in Paris with a full bank account and a clear conscience. I take a sip of the cognac. It burns pleasantly. I think about the last 6 months. I have seen the changing of the guard at Buckingham Palace. I have walked the Great Wall of China. I have driven my rented convertible along the Amalfi Coast. I am spending the money I earned. I am living the life Beatrice and I saved for. I am not hoarding it for ungrateful heirs. I am investing it in memories. My phone buzzes in my pocket. It is the only connection I kept to my old life. It is an email from Mr. Stone. He sends me a monthly report. He calls it the damage assessment. I do not read it with glee. I do not read it with malice. I read it with the detached interest of a building inspector looking at a structure that failed because of poor materials. I open the email. There are photos attached. The first photo is of Keisha. It was taken from a distance through the window of a diner in Macon, Georgia. It is not a trendy brunch spot. It is a truck stop off the highway. Keisha is wearing a uniform that is 2 sizes too small. It is stained with grease. She is holding a coffee pot, and she looks exhausted. I zoom in on her face. The arrogance is gone. The entitlement is gone. She looks 10 years older than she is. Her hair is pulled back in a messy bun, and she is not wearing any makeup. She looks like a woman who has learned the value of $1 the hard way. Stone writes that she is living in a studio apartment above a garage. She takes the bus to work because her car was repossessed 3 months ago. She works double shifts. She stands on her feet for 10 hours a day serving people who treat her the way she used to treat me. I look at her shoes in the photo. They are cheap sneakers, the kind that hurt your arches. I remember the closet full of Gucci and Prada I sent to the storage unit. I wonder if she ever went to get them. I wonder if she sold them to pay rent. I feel a pang of sadness. Not regret, just sadness. I wanted better for her. I raised her to be better. But she chose the easy path, and the easy path led her here to a diner with sticky floors and bad tips. I scroll down. The next photo is of Brent. He is not in a diner. He is leaving a pawn shop in Birmingham, Alabama. He looks like a ghost. He has lost 30 pounds. His skin is gray. He is wearing a hoodie pulled low over his face, and he is looking over his shoulder. His right arm is still in a cast, but it looks dirty, like he has been wearing it too long. Stone reports that Brent is living out of motels, moving every 3 days. He is terrified. He knows Vinny has a long reach. He knows that debt doesn't disappear just because you cross state lines. He is working day labor jobs, paying cash so he doesn't leave a paper trail. The man who thought he was a financial genius is now mixing cement for minimum wage, trying not to get noticed. The last document in the email is a scan of a divorce decree. It is final. They turned on each other just like I knew they would. When the money ran out, the love ran out. They blamed each other for the downfall. Keisha blamed Brent for the gambling. Brent blamed Keisha for the greed. They signed the papers with hatred in their hearts. They are alone now, just like they wanted me to be. I put the phone down on the table. The jazz band picks up the tempo. The drummer is playing a swing beat that makes my foot tap. I fold the napkin on the table. I smooth out the creases. People say blood is thicker than water. They say family is everything. But they are wrong. Respect is everything. Integrity is everything. Blood is just biology. I could have saved them. I could have written a check. I could have let them take the house. I could have gone quietly into the night and let them feast on my legacy. But that would not have been love. That would have been enablement. If I had saved them, I would have robbed them of the only lesson that matters. I would have taught them that you can take what isn't yours and get away with it. I would have taught them that weakness is rewarded. Now Keisha knows what it means to work. Now Brent knows what it means to fear. They are finally living real lives. Hard lives, but real ones. In a way, I gave them a gift. I gave them the truth. I reach into my pocket and pull out the velvet pouch. I open it and slide the pearl necklace into my hand. The pearls glow in the candlelight of the club. They are warm to the touch. I remember Beatrice wearing them. I remember her laugh. I remember her telling me, "Julius, you build strong things. Do not let anyone tear them down." "I am still building, B," I whisper. I put the pearls back in my pocket right next to my heart. I signal the waiter for the check. I pay with a black card that has my name on it. I tip him well. I stand up. I button my jacket. I grab my hat. I walk out of the club and onto the cobblestone streets of Paris. The air is cool and smells of rain and river water. The Eiffel Tower is glowing in the distance, a beacon of steel and light. I take a deep breath, filling my lungs. I do not have a daughter anymore. I do not have a son-in-law. But I have my dignity. I have my peace. And I have the rest of my life. My daughter wanted to get rid of me. She wanted to erase me. Instead, she erased herself. I walk toward the river, my steps echoing on the stones. I am Julius Carter, site superintendent, millionaire, survivor. And I am just getting started. They say you cannot choose your family, but you can certainly choose your dignity. Keisha and Brent spent their lives waiting for an inheritance they felt they deserved rather than building a life they could be proud of. They mistook my silence for weakness and my age for obsolescence. But as any builder knows, if you try to construct a future on a foundation of lies and greed, the structure will inevitably collapse. I did not lose a daughter. I gained my freedom. Remember, respect is earned, not inherited, and sometimes the hardest thing you have to build is a boundary. If you enjoyed watching Justice Be Served, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comments, would you have given them a second chance, or did they get exactly what they deserved?